Theo gets the message.
I am your father. I brought you in this world, and I'll take you out.
Weekdays at 5 on WRAL-TV.
This is a CBS News special inauguration report. From the nation's capital, here again is Dan Rather.
And under the dome of the Capitol, our new president, President Bush, is signing the documents which officially confirm his cabinet appointments. Let's pick up a little of the byplay here.
Yes, sir. If you don't like it,
Alan Cranston to your far left, Speaker Wright just to President Bush's right, Senator Mitchell of Maine to the new president's left, Bob Dole back in the background off the left now. Alan Simpson, Wyoming, moving in to become part of the picture now. Pens being handed out, which has become a modern policy, we won't say a tradition of presidents, to sign these documents and give souvenir pens to folks. As President Reagan's, former President Reagan now, a helicopter bearing him, Nighthawk 1, with Mrs. Reagan, approaches Andrews Air Force Base for the touchdown and the transfer to the aircraft. Won't be Air Force One in the sense that the fleet of White House aircraft carries the former president of California. Won't be Air Force One. Bill Plant, our White House correspondent who has covered Ronald Reagan's campaigns for the presidency and then been White House correspondent during the Reagan presidency, is at Andrews Air Force Base. Bill, there was a reference to the hostages in George Bush's inaugural speech. Big piece of unfinished business.
That's right, Dan. It's one of the great frustrations of Ronald Reagan's presidency. He himself said it in interviews in the last days of his presidency. His staff says the same thing. It was the one big piece of unfinished business for Ronald Reagan. And the Bush reference today is interesting, Dan. It seems to indicate that he is inviting help from other nations for the release of those hostages, something obviously that will be necessary. Somebody is going to have to mediate between the U.S. and Iran, so it seems, before those people are released from Lebanon or wherever they're held in captivity.
Bill, and I know you agree with this, as a personal word, we want in a personal and direct way the families of Terry Anderson, the great reporter for the Associated Press, and the other hostages being held, to know that we're thinking of them today. Terry Anderson has been held captive by these terrorists, kidnappers, and unspeakable people since March 16th of 1985. Terry Waite, the Anglican church envoy from Britain, today begins his third year in captivity.
You know, Dan, there was a lot of hope that there would be some gesture made on the part of those who hold hostages at the time of President Bush's inauguration, but it doesn't seem to have materialized. And we do know that it weighs heavily on the departing Mr. Reagan.
Well, for one reason, Bill, President Reagan came into office very critical. Former President Jimmy Carter's handling of the hostage crisis in Iran. No doubt, knowledge of that fact, while it recedes into memory, adds to President Reagan's frustration. There were all those rumors, various reports that the Ayatollah Khomeini was going to try to once again be a part of the transfer of power in the United States as he was in 1981.
Well, of course,
the day is not over, but so far, no.
And at that point, Iran, a government, acknowledged holding 52 American hostages. And now the people who hold them are much more shadowy, much more difficult to pin down. Here, as you see, Dan, our president and Mrs. Reagan waving to the crowd of 1,000 or so people who have gathered out here at Andrews Air Force Base. A lot of them apparently Air Force people and their dependents, but some others too who came as invited to see Mr. Reagan off.
See, the wind is whipping up a bit there at Andrews Air Force Base. And Charles, Ronald Reagan walking to the aircraft to carry him back to California as a former president, as you pointed out, reminds us that all that talk about there being a 20-year jinx on the American presidency, that every 20 years whoever was president died in office. Among other things, Ronald Reagan has outlived and outserved that.
That's our oldest and most famous jinx. It started with William Henry Harrison in 1840, Lincoln in 1860, Garfield in 1880, in 1900 McKinley, 1920 Harding, 1940 FDR, 1960 JFK, and by leaving office, hale and hearty, as obviously he is, we can dispose of that particular bit of superstition.
The honor guard prepared for inspection.
President Reagan, who is proudest, perhaps, or to say certainly proud of the fact that, as he puts it, he rebuilt America's defenses, to describe by and reviewing troops assembled for him at Andrews Air Force Base before he and Mrs. Reagan take off for California. Here's what President George Bush had to say about Ronald Reagan just a few minutes ago at the Capitol.
trying to keep the tears from flooding down my cheeks. That's what was going through my mind. After 8 years of friendship, it's pretty tough.
The relationship between President Reagan and his then Vice President George Bush was something that started out on a rather low note because they were opponents in 1980 for the presidency and slowly built during the years of the Reagan presidency.
Well, but build it did, Dan, and they became, as you know, very, very close. Ronald Reagan came to feel that George Bush expressed the most loyalty that any vice president had ever given to a president in the 200 years of the Republic's history. And that's one reason that he supported him so vigorously in this past election. Ronald Reagan felt that George Bush was the perfect vice president.
Bill, and what a contrast that strikes with the time when President Eisenhower went out of office and Richard Nixon was going to run for the presidency in 1960, which he did. Yet President Eisenhower never came close to doing for Richard Nixon what Ronald Reagan did for George Bush in this campaign.
No, and of course, Dan, everybody remembers the famous incident when President Eisenhower was asked what important decisions President Nixon had helped him make. And he said, if you give me a minute, maybe I'll think of one. That didn't help either.
Bill, tick off for us, in Ronald Reagan's view, the major accomplishments of his presidency.
Dan, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you there.
Say, in Ronald Reagan's view, tick off for us what he considers to be his major accomplishments.
Dan, no question that he believes that the rebuilding of military strength in the United States is his major accomplishment. That, cutting taxes, and probably most of all, restoring confidence, the confidence of Americans in America. You mentioned, Dan, earlier that it was windy out here. There was a red carpet. They had to roll it up. It kept blowing away. And the Reagans are now inside the presidential aircraft.
And ready for the trip to California. Now, in addition to his ranch, where you've seen him so often during his presidency, President Reagan with Nancy Reagan, they have a brand new home they'll be moving into in, where else? Beverly Hills.
They'll find things very different in Los Angeles than when they left. As people have already pointed out, getting around in traffic out there is going to be a little difficult. They'll still have Secret Service protection, but not helicopters.
David Barber, from a historical perspective, naturally the most fervent supporters of Ronald Reagan are nominating him for Mount Rushmore. It's always difficult just in those first hours, never mind the first years after President leaves office, to know. But your estimate of where Ronald Reagan will fit into our history of the American presidency?
You can be sure his reputation will go up and go down and go back and go forth. That happens to every president after he's in office. The plus side is going to be what he said. Dan, he came forth as someone, as an effective champion of the fundamental rights of this country in world politics, for instance. That is, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. He was advertising that we were not just neutral about what happened to people. He expressed his compassion for individuals. That expression is worth appreciating. The other side of the coin is the great gap between what he said and what he did. He leaves the country with some very, very heavy problems, and his own performance as president in the White House was much more unplugged than what you think Bush is going to do. So I think there is a real confirmation of Reagan as not being as involved as he should have been by author after author who worked closely with him. You're not talking about people who just had an impression, but people who knew him and worked with him. So I think there is a heavy plus and a minus about it. You can't just evaluate a president by what happened on the scene, you know? Some things he was into, some things he wasn't into. You know, some children play the game called turn green when they drive up to a stoplight and they see the red, and they say, turn green, turn green, turn green. And then when the light turns green, the kid says, power. I've got it. Now that kind of thing all politicians like to do. So it's not just what's happening in the country. You got to think about were we right, were we wrong in choosing this particular president who was into sentimentality rather than the practical, into the theatricalness of the presidency rather than the reality of it.
This is live from inside the Capitol in Statuary Hall. Inside the Capitol of the United States, as the door is about ready to close on former President Reagan's plane for his trip back to California. Switch now live and direct to the Capitol. This has become a tradition, this luncheon in the Capitol. And Statuary Hall is that place in the Capitol. Those of you who visited Washington are bound to have seen it, one of the more popular places in the town. Or each state gets to have two people put in statue form for Statuary Hall. For example, Texas has Sam Houston. Each state gets two. And so in this environment, surrounded by the statues of Statuary Hall, President Bush, Mrs. Bush, Vice President Dan Quayle. I noticed that the Reverend Dr. Billy Graham called him James Danforth Quayle. Along with members of the Joint Congressional Inaugural Committee and their spouses. That would include Senator Mitchell, Bob Michael from the House, all of those that you saw and whose names we listed earlier as being part of the Congressional Inaugural Committee and their spouses and or other most important people who may be with them. We're having lunch here. The chairs of all the standing committees of the Senate and the House, and each one of them gets a guest. Persons participating in the program, such as the Smithsonian Players, the musical entertainment, all of them having a lunch in the Capitol. Now, what are they eating? Well, appetizer, lobster, scallop, grilled breast of spring chicken with mustard sauce, 4-grain pilau, asparagus, grilled red and yellow peppers, brandied pear crisp, and one of President Bush's favorites, vanilla ice cream. Live from Andrews Air Force Base now. The Boeing 707 taxis onto the long runway, which will begin the Reagan's trip home. Now, in addition to getting the new presidential limousine, that one we talked about before, which is at a cost of about $600,000, a new limousine, President Bush will be flying in the new Air Force One soon, and that being a completely refitted Boeing 747 as opposed to the Boeing 707, which has been the aircraft type for Air Force One since the time of President Kennedy. He got the 707 as Air Force One, and every president, President Kennedy, and since then has had it. Now they'll move to the larger 747, a larger aircraft, which is a kind of flying home in the sky for presidents of the United States. Also at Andrews Air Force Base, just behind where this plane is taxiing, is the specially outfitted Boeing 747, which would take a president aloft in case of a threatened or actual, God forbid, nuclear war. The plan would be to get him out to Andrews Air Force Base as quickly as possible, get him in the 747 and send him as high up as possible. It's one of those plans that have to be made, but nobody wants to think about. Now, what's going to happen this afternoon after this luncheon at the Capitol, this luncheon, which has just begun, will take a while, and it will be followed by President and Mrs. Bush, Vice President and Mrs. Quayle, going back down Pennsylvania Avenue to view the inaugural parade. As President Reagan and Mrs. Reagan, former President Reagan, Nancy Reagan, began to take off, the Air Force singing sergeants will sing for us now God Bless the USA by Lee Greenwood, which was the official campaign song for President Reagan.
If tomorrow all the things were gone I'd worked for all my life, and I had to start again with just my children and my wife,
I'd thank my lucky stars to be living here today, 'cause the flag still stands for freedom, and they can't take that away. And I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free. And I won't forget the men who died, who gave this right to me. And I'll gladly stand up next to you and defend her still today, 'cause there ain't no doubt I love this land. God bless the USA.
From the lakes of Minnesota to the hills of Tennessee,
Across the plains of Texas, from sea to shining sea.
from Detroit down to Houston and New York to LA. There's pride in every American heart, and it's time we stand today.
And I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free. And I won't forget the men who died, who gave this right to me. And I'm glad to stand up
Next to you and defend her still today.
'cause there ain't no doubt I love this land. God bless the USA. And I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm
Goodbye with a salute to former President Reagan and Nancy Reagan. As it wheels up at Andrews Air Force Base, headed for California. Dan Rather with Charles Perrault and Professor David Barber, who's been kind enough to help us here today. I was reminded of the story that former Defense Secretary Weinberger tells on himself. He says, you know, when you lose those government airplanes, it's a shock these days. Weinberger said to somebody, you know, I get on planes and they see people next to me I don't even know.
You don't have to worry about it on that.
Former
particular
presidents may not
airplane.
have to worry about that. So the torch has been passed here today. It is now President George Bush and former President Ronald Reagan. In his inaugural address, President Bush set the tone for the next 4 years, picking up on his campaign theme of a kinder, gentler America. He said this would be, quote, the age of the offered hand. And he talked about a new breeze blowing. So now that the constitutional business of the day is done, the inaugural address has been delivered, President Bush and Vice President Quayle have been sworn in, this city will get back to celebrating what's been going on here all week, and it's going to be a terrific celebration. We hope you'll stick with our coverage for it. Tonight there'll be the fancy dress balls, but up next, coming up very shortly, the inaugural parade. Now, we'll be back on the air within the hour at 2 p.m. Eastern Time to bring that to you with the help of Charles Perrault and the rest of our CBS News inaugural team. So stick here with us. For right now, we're going to take a short break. Dan Rather in Washington. See you at the parade shortly.
From Washington, this has been CBS News' continuing coverage of the inauguration of George Bush. This is a CBS News special inauguration report. From the nation's capital, here is Dan Rather.
Welcome once again to Washington, D.C., our nation's capital, and welcome for the first time to a brand new era for the United States of America. Just about 2 hours ago, out there at the newly refurbished west front of the U.S. Capitol, executive power passed from Ronald Reagan to George Bush. George Bush was sworn in as this nation's 41st president in a 200-year-old ceremony that is always moving, always beautiful in its simplicity, rich in meaning. At his inauguration, John F. Kennedy described it as a celebration of freedom. And the celebrating is about to begin again with an inaugural parade from the Capitol back here, down Pennsylvania Avenue to the White House. Mr. Bush said in his inaugural address, that a new breeze is blowing, and he's proving to be right. It's hang on to your hat windy out there along the parade route. Joining me again now to help bring it to you, Charles Carroll. Charles, was struck again, and I don't think we can emphasize this too much, we certainly haven't today, that what is admired worldwide, even by people who consider themselves critics of the American system, is this smooth transfer of power. And our friend David Barber, a good professor from Duke, was saying, you know, the ancient pharaohs had trouble with transfer of power. So did the ancient Greeks, the Romans, Carthaginians. They all had difficulty with it. And part of the uniqueness of our American constitutional system, at least in the 200 years so far of our presidency, has been through good times and bad, we're able to make that transfer of power smoothly, peacefully, and rather easily.
Yeah, you're looking at a one-time Latin American correspondent for CBS News, and all the transfers of power I ever covered, or almost all of them, were accompanied by gunshots.
When he reached in his pocket,
it's just not part of the Latin tradition to
and put a lighter to it and start
have a man in a business suit raise his hand and take the oath and let the other man go home to wherever he came from.
Charles, this we're picking up now live from the Congressional Luncheon there in Statuary Hall inside the Capitol. Senator Wendell Ford, the Democrat of Kentucky, who's chairman of the Inauguration Committee.
The greatest gift this country can give was given to you on last November the 8th. The people showed their confidence in and for you to be the leader of the greatest and strongest nation in the world. If we could have the box, we'll be glad to present a gift to the President. Mr. President, this hand-blown, one-of-a-kind crystal bowl by Lenox Crystal Company displays a detailed hand engraving of the Capitol on one side and an arbor of flowering cherry trees on the near side, creating a three-dimensional effect. The base is inscribed commemorating your swearing in at this bicentennial inauguration, January the 20th, 1989. It is my privilege, Mr. President, and my honor to present this gift to you from the Congress and from the American people to show our love and affection to you and Barbara. You don't have to do anything now, Mr. President. We'll just don't drop it, please. And Mr. Vice President, we, the Congress, also have a similar gift for you in Maryland. It may be a little smaller, but with the same love and affection. Thank you, man. You did well. Thank you. Do what? Cigars next. Have you started again? Okay. Mr. President, today we celebrate the bicentennial inaugural of the President of the United States of America. We have used the first great seal of this country throughout our portion of this day. The Great Seal was designed to symbolize the hope and promise of a new nation that had high aspirations and grand hopes for the future. The bicentennial inaugural that we celebrate today is living proof that those hopes and aspirations have not only been achieved, but they still endure. Mr. President and First Lady, as you know, we're having another luncheon today in this building. We visited them a few moments ago. Your grandchildren and my grandchildren, along with children of participants in this luncheon, are dining on grilled cheese sandwiches, chicken nuggets, fresh fruit, soft drinks, and milk. I've checked, Mr. President, and at that luncheon, there has been no talk of politics. Only the vibrant enthusiasm of the young. So my toast to you today is a challenge to you and all of us, not as Republicans or Democrats, but as Americans, to see that before they and others of every race, creed, and color leave this earth, they are nourished in mind and in body and in spirit. So, Mr. President, to your good health and long life with your lady at your side. So we, the Congress. Thank you. Thank you very much. We will now hear from the President.
Thank you, Senator Ford. And the parade is about to begin, so let me just say a couple of words. I look around this room and I see many friends with whom I served in the Congress and many friends with whom I worked for the last 8 years when I was President of the Senate. I first want to thank Senator Ford and his committee, Ted, others, who have done just an outstanding job on making this People's Day so spectacularly successful. And I'm grateful to all of you. Wendell just said, Mr. President, as we walked out of the platform there, coming up some steps and then down some steps to say goodbye to President Reagan, the Sergeant at Arms of the House said, Mr. President, and I'm standing there waiting for President Reagan. And I feel something that was between an affectionate hug and a kidney punch. The silver fox telling me to get going. And but I just want to say thank you to all of you. The parade is going to be a good one. No politics today. This is going to be a very special day for the country, as it has been for the last 200 years. And Bar and I are just delighted to have this significant part in it. But we really came here at the conclusion of this lunch to say thanks to the members of the House, thanks to the members of the Senate for this wonderful way to start off this presidency. We're grateful to you, sir. Well done. And may I propose a toast to the members of the Congress, to the institution, the House of Representatives, the Senate of the United States. May they flourish and may they prosper.
Congressional luncheon continues. The parade a little behind time, but let's hold on 1 second now.
Presentations. Representative Michael has a presentation at this time. Bob?
Well, Bob Michael is going to make a presentation at this time, but as per my instructions, and I hope Congressman Michael will forgive us, as the congressional luncheon continues, we're going to say we're pausing for these messages. We'll be right back. The parade running a little behind schedule, but we'll have it for you shortly.
I have served 4 presidents in the White House, and each of these men, I have changed their hairstyle quite a bit to make them look more presidential, I think. So with this vice president, I think he looks great, and if I were he, I wouldn't change a thing.
This portion of CBS News special inauguration coverage is sponsored by Nabisco Brands. At Nabisco, we make products that make friends.
I don't know when it happened, when it became a love affair. Seems like it almost never started, like it was always there. You shower me with sweetness, you fill my life with spice. You're right there when I need you, you're everything that's nice. And I can't imagine life without you. The world would seem so empty, feel so plain. It would be like having flowers with no colors or perfume. A day without the sun to warm the rain. 'Cause you're my favorite for life. You're my taste of home, no matter where I go. I love you, and I wanted you to know. You're my favorite for life.
Okay, this is Maybelline Perfect Pen Eyeliner. It actually works like a felt tip pen. Thick lines, thin lines, whatever. You're in control. And isn't that nice for a change? Perfect Pen. Smart, beautiful, Maybelline.
I just tried your classical D'Abruzzi beef and pork pasta sauce. My Italian grandmother made sauce like this, and yours is very, very close to hers.
Classical D'Abruzzi, authentic regional pasta sauce.
A little exercise never hurts, and neither does eating right, especially when it's Sunsweet pitted prunes with yogurt. Rounder, plumper Sunsweet. So good tasting, and so good for you.
Well, the wind is up, but the sun is out, and so are a lot of people out waiting for this inaugural parade to begin. But as often happens with the Congress of the United States, things are running a little behind schedule. And so a lot of people are out there craning their necks and sort of jumping up and down, trying to keep warm and saying to themselves, well, when are they going to get this thing started? The answer is very soon. You heard President Bush say a few moments ago to those in the Statuary Hall in the Capitol, we want to get this thing rolling along. Nobody wants to get it rolling along anymore, with the possible exception of President Bush and Vice President Quayle and Easy Ed Bradley, who's right across the street from the reviewing stand there in front of the White House, right high above Lafayette Park, waiting for the parade to begin. Ed, the sense of anticipation has been growing and spilling over, and I expect if they don't get it started fairly soon, folks will begin to grumble a little if this administration is not setting a very good standard about being on time.
Dan, I'll tell you, there's a real air of expectancy here. I was just looking at the stands starting to fill up. They're about 3/4 full now. Even the presidential reviewing stand in the center is starting to fill up, although no one's in the box in the center where the immediate family will be. The White House Herald trumpeters have just moved into place in the last couple of minutes. Security is into place. Just to give you an example of how tight the security is, we tried to go across the street not too long ago, across Pennsylvania Avenue, and we're told, no, you can't do it. And actually, if you can see those boxwood trees on either side of the presidential reviewing stand behind the Herald trumpeters, they came in a couple of days ago. They came in on a flatbed trailer. Next to the trailer was a van, and inside the van was one of those metal security detectors they have at the airport. Each of those boxwood plants went into the van, in through the metal security detector before it was put into place. So they're ready for the presidential party to come on down. You know, earlier while the inauguration ceremony was taking place up on Capitol Hill, we were looking at some of the furniture being moved out of the White House. We're told, we thought first it was the Reagan furniture, remembering a story from the Calvin Coolidge days, the last day that he was here, he had the White House staff furiously running around looking for a trunk that he had lost. But we're told that this is, you might call it transition furniture. It belongs to the people, to the government. It doesn't belong to the Reagans or the Bushes. Most of the furniture, the Reagan furniture, was moved out some time ago. You sort of wondered, though, wondering if Mrs. Reagan actually went around with her husband saying, now, is this ours? Did we bring this here, or does this belong to the White House? Because obviously a good deal of that furniture stays there. But anyway, we're ready for some bands, so if you've got some bands, you can send us down some music, Dan.
Boy, do we have bands, and they'll start rolling your way very soon, Ed. Ed Bradley in front of the White House across from the reviewing stand. And by the way, Ed, Herbert Collins, the historian with Smithsonian and others who's with us here today, was reminding us that, you know, during the 19th century, which is, say, in the 1800s, that some of the presidents, as they moved in, just threw away furniture. And there's been a great effort to find some of that old furniture. They've actually done it and restore it back into the White House. And he also reminded us that Richard Nixon is the only president that we know of who actually left a piece of furniture of his own in the White House. He bought a small table, paid for it with his own money, and left it in the White House. So certainly the only one of the 20th century to do that. Kathleen Sullivan is with 3 members of the submarine Finback. Now, that's the U-boat that rescued George Bush when he was shot down during World War II. And Kathleen, I understand we're also going to have a little drama this afternoon about one of the floats, if we can call it that mock-up of the George Bush plane, which is going to come down the parade route, but at several points it only has 2-foot clearance on each side. So we're going to have to wait and see whether they can actually get it through that narrow passageway. The airplane, the mock-up of the plane, the bomber that George Bush flew. But these gentlemen were aboard the Finback that fished him out of the Pacific.
And this gentleman here is the man who pulled George Bush out of the water when he was shot down over Iwo Jima in World War II, Don Kohler.
That's right.
Now, where are you from? Where are you living now, Don?
Rogers, Arkansas.
Now, you were also on the Finback?
Yes, Lawrence Hayworth, and I'm from Virginia Beach.
And I'm Dean Spratland from Atlanta.
All right, now, let's get right to it, though. When you pulled George Bush out of the water, which hand did you use?
I used my right hand, and Bill Connolly used his left hand. So there was 2 of us that actually pulled him out.
When you pulled him out, was that the first time you pulled out someone who was shot down over the Pacific? Was that normal?
No, the day before, we had rescued another pilot and his 2 crewmen, the day before.
But
so this was the second time.
But because he was an officer, and he had to spend 30 days aboard the submarine with all of you, you got to know him pretty well, didn't you?
Pretty well.
And you palled around with him?
Yes, we did. We got to know him very well, and he had a great sense of humor, and he was very bright and outgoing. And we called him Ellie because he imitated an elephant so well. He used to go, whoa, like that.
Was a Republican always a Republican?
We should have read the signs. We didn't know he was going to be president.
But now that you do know that he's president of the United States, have you seen him at all in recent months?
I've seen him, oh, sure. He's a great guy. He's very loyal to his old friends, and he's been very good to us. So.
Are you comfortable calling him George now?
Not now, no. I think I should call him Mr. President now.
Thank you so much.
Certainly not Ellie.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan.
Thanks, Kathleen. It is remarkable that nearly everybody who knows George Bush, and including some who don't particularly like him, say one of the outstanding things about him is he really does stay in touch with his friends and has always done that. And over the years, he has an extraordinary number of friends, particularly for a person in political life, from way, way back. Speaks very well for him and how he treasures friendships. Harry Smith is along Pennsylvania Avenue with a man who marched almost 30 years ago down this same avenue. Was it in an inaugural parade, Harry?
It was in an inaugural parade when John F. Kennedy came down Pennsylvania Avenue. Bob Massley was in that parade, and you were marching with your reserve unit, right?
Right. We were the selected reserve unit to march with the parade at that time, yes.
What was it like?
Very cold. I think that was one of they had removed a lot of snow the night before. And I know we waited a number of hours, really cold.
But as a reservist marching down Pennsylvania Avenue, you actually did get a glimpse of the president, didn't you?
I'll never forget his face. It was cherry red that night, and he watched all the units march by. Yep, he was great.
Your son's at VMI, and he's in the parade today, too, right?
That's why I'm here now, to see my son march in his parade.
There's a lot of good reasons for folks to come out here today. We are shivering here in the shadows of the Justice Department, and where we are on Pennsylvania Avenue, about 15 deep. And these folks here are ready for the parade to start, Dan.
Thanks, Harry. Kathleen Sullivan a minute ago mentioned that she thought George Bush was shot down near Iwo Jima. It's an easy, not very important thing to correct, that he was shot down near Chichijima, which is a different island in the Pacific up near Japan. This was during World War II, of course. While those of us who lived through it, it's very vivid in our mind, you have to be aware that an awful lot of people, Charles, I guess for many Americans, maybe more than half our population, talking about World War II, may seem as distant as talking about the Napoleonic campaigns or something.
Yeah, that's right. It seems just the other day to me.
And I'm sure it does to George Bush when you go through that kind of combat experience. Well, while we wait for the parade to start, while they're wrapping up the behind-schedule luncheon in Congress, in the Capitol, let's pause for these messages. We'll be right back.
Lots of long hours and hard days wrapped up in this one. The Pontiac Transport SE. Took it all the way from the design studio to reality. You factor it all in. Safety, comfort, performance. Then make sure it ends up beautiful. You know, I think we did it.
GM has been recognized for design excellence by the Industrial Designer Society of America more than any other U.S. company.
Wow.
What you eating, babe?
Nothing, honey.
Oh, you can tell me.
Kellogg's Nut and Honey Crunch. Looks good, Private. What is it? Nothing, honey.
Kellogg's Nut and Honey Crunch.
When you've got the special taste of nuts and honey all wrapped up in a hearty crunch, what more can you say? Here's what. New Nut and Honey Crunch Biscuits. Crunchy biscuits of wholesome shredded wheat with that special nut and honey taste inside.
Wow.
Kellogg's Nut and Honey.
Now in biscuits, too.
Crunch.
Applesauce, applesauce, applesauce. New Dole pineapple sauce. The delicious fresh-cut taste of pineapple that's anything but boring. Try New Dole pineapple sauce, chunky or smooth.
Life's a little fresher with Dole. I'm not going to take it anymore.
Sure, Metamucil works, but it's gritty.
I'm not going to take it anymore.
No more. Take low-calorie Citrusel Regular. Citrusel isn't gritty, and it really works.
Have fun. Getting out and enjoying yourself. That's what life is all about. And it's easy when you have the best bladder control protection. Depend Undergarments has special layers of absorbency that won't bunch or sag, and elastic legs for a better fit. They're the best protection and the best way for you to get back into life. Hey!
Get back into life with Depend.
The making of freeze-dried Taster's Choice coffee. Search the world for the finest coffee beans. Grind them. And at the peak of freshness, brew the richest, most aromatic coffee you can brew. Then freeze it. Freeze-drying locks in the fresh brewed aroma and flavor until you release it. For a truly superior cup of coffee, the choice for taste is Taster's Choice.
Taste it.
The country has a new president, a new era, the George Bush, Dan Quayle era, and we're waiting for the inaugural parade to begin. And Charles, it'll be worth waiting for, although as the minutes tick by, it occurs to me that if George Bush is as smart as I think he is, he may be, whether they like it or not, saying adios to those people in Congress pretty soon now and say, I'm sorry, guys, I got to get on with this parade because I'm going to get a lot of folks mad at me if I don't.
That's right. He said in his brief talk to the members of Congress that there are no politics today, but believe me, there are politics today. There are politics every day in this town. And you can even see politics reflected in the parade. Every state is going to be equal in this gaudy parade to come, but some states are more equal than others. I was noticing that there are I think there are 10 units from the state of Texas, pretty nearly leading off the parade, and a fair number from Indiana, as you would expect, the state of our new vice president. There are going to be 57 state seal floats, which puzzled me since I thought there were only 50 states. But we're including places most Americans don't think of as being American. Places like American Samoa and the Northern Marianas are all going to be represented, the Virgin Islands and so on.
And our friends in Guam, they're always very much in evidence with their floats. Charles, we may have quoted him too much today because he's so easy to quote, but things move so swiftly in American politics that Will Rogers, and let's face it, hadn't been that long ago, back in the 1920s, said, you talk about Texas having so many floats in the parade, Rogers said Texas never thought they would come to a point where there would ever be any Republicans there. This was at a time when the state was strictly a one-party state, and all the way through World War II and beyond, winning the Democratic primary in Texas, as it was in North Carolina, was tantamount to election. George Bush is one of the people, along with John Tower, who helped change that.
Will Rogers, thou shouldst be living at this Republican hour in the District of Columbia.
Bob Schieffer is on Capitol Hill waiting for the new president and the beginning of the parade. Bob, you're down from your vantage point up there where the swearing-in took place. Folks in the crowds have been patient up to now, but I gather the patience is beginning to go a little bit at the edges.
Well, we're over on the other side of the Capitol now, Dan, where they used to hold inaugurals until Ronald Reagan came along and Mike Deaver decided it was a much better picture from the other side of the Capitol. We're kind of the law library entrance back here, and we're waiting for George Bush and his party to come out and board the limousines, which are just in front of us and behind the camera here. In just a moment, they were on their way. There's a camera inside the Capitol, and we were expecting them to come out momentarily, but they perhaps made a little stop along the way after lunch, and they should be here momentarily. Kind of a gale force wind is blown up back here, Dan. It was very pleasant this morning, and then the sun went behind the clouds and it began to get a little chilly. But this wind has really picked up in the last 15 or 20 minutes, and so it's going to be, you need your overcoat now.
Linda Tyra is right at the head of the parade form-up. That's at Madison and 7th. Remember, we're in the Carpenters and Joiners Union building overlooking the Capitol. But Linda is, well, as we look straight ahead, the parade will form up there, sort of hook a U, and then come down Pennsylvania Avenue. Linda, the parade participants have been ready and have been ready for quite a long while. I expect they're long past the point where they're ready to roll.
I'll tell you, Dan, they've been waiting since the crack of dawn, really. They were told to go to the Pentagon early this morning, then bust over here, and then they had to hurry up and wait. And then the military has sent some representatives to organize everyone. But I'll tell you right now, because of the wind, you see the Troy State University from Troy, Alabama. They're off to my right. They've been sort of shivering, even though it's sunshine and blue skies. This wind is kicking up pretty good down here, and so they've taken some shelter as best as they can, at least clustering around one another. But right behind me is a group from Anchorage, Alaska. They seem to be a lot more prepared for this. Dan?
Thanks, Linda Tyra. Phil Jones is on Capitol Hill with the new Majority Leader of the United States Senate, Senator the Honorable George Mitchell. Phil?
Well, Mr. Leader, that wind that's picking up out there must be the new Bush breeze that he was talking about. What's your reaction to the tone of the speech and what was said today?
A very good speech, an excellent, positive tone, reaching out, forthcoming. He said to Speaker Wright and myself that he extended his hand. We extend ours. I think it's a good start. We look forward to working with him.
Well, now, Senator, you've been around here for a long time, and a lot of politicians at both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue have talked a lot about extending the hand of cooperation. So what's any different this time?
Well, I think there is a real genuine sincerity on the part of the new president, his administration, and on our part to do what we can for the country, despite the differences between us. Obviously, there are going to be disagreements. This wouldn't be democracy if there weren't. But we can work together, and I believe we will.
Did his calling for bipartisan cooperation in foreign policy, does that put the Democrats on the spot a little bit?
Not at all. We're Americans first, and we want to cooperate. I'll be making a statement in the Senate early next week, setting forth some of our goals, and I intend to respond in kind. We want to have a bipartisan foreign policy.
Can you cooperate on the budget if the new president does not go along with a tax increase of some sort
He has said that he can do the job without taxes. If he can do it, why, we'll be the first to cheer. We haven't seen his program yet. When we see it, then we'll respond to it. We look forward to it.
But do you believe at this point, as you look at it, that there is a good possibility that there will have to be some increase in taxes? Not income tax, but some increase in tax.
No, your question assumes that Mr. Bush didn't mean what he said and can't do what he promised. I don't share that cynicism about him. My feeling is, let's see what he can do. Let's give him a chance to present his program. When we get it, then we'll review it. Everything ought to be considered. Let's look at his plan.
Phil, if I may, I don't want to interrupt there. I'm not sure whether Senator Mitchell can hear or not.
He can? I can, Dan.
Senator, you've said that George Bush's inaugural address was a good one from your viewpoint. You appreciate the fact that he reached out his hand to the Congress, talked about bipartisanship. Do you have any difficulty, or do you, with the fact that Lee Atwater, who helped to run his campaign, has been on the front page of the papers lately bragging about the fact that they ran a campaign based in part on racial differences, saying all the right things. Look, it was necessary to do that. But the campaign's over. We're looking toward a new era. But is that going to give George Bush difficulty if his aides talk one way about how rough and tumble politics is, and he talks another way about reaching out a hand? Or can he pull that off?
Well, first, of course, George Bush is president, not Lee Atwater, and it's Mr. Bush with whom we'll be dealing, and we prefer to take his statements at face value, regardless of what Mr. Atwater says. Secondly, with respect to the campaign, an individual, an institution, a nation is capable of both good and bad things, high ideals and base motives. I don't agree with what happened in the campaign. I disagreed with a lot of it. But it's over, and our obligation now is to the nation, and we have to do what's right for the country. And frankly, I intend to deal with Mr. Bush. I hope to deal with him on the basis which he's laid out, to which we will respond, not to Mr. Atwater.
Thank you. Senator George Mitchell, the new Majority Leader of the United States Senate, and Phil Jones. Thanks.
Thank you.
We'll be right back. Well, it's turned out to be a brilliant, cold inaugural afternoon, so stay in here with us.
Before you tackle a mountain the size of Everest, you've already made your most critical decisions. What to bring with you.
When 1,000 doctors were asked if they were stranded in a place like this, which one of these medicines would they want along? Doctors chose Bayer, more than all these combined.
I chose Bayer. Shouldn't you?
Bayer, the wonder drug that works wonders. Also in coated caplets.
This is what I wonder. If this is just right, how can that one be just right? I mean, here they have fruit and nuts with all those flakes, and there they have fiber nuggets, huh? So this isn't just a little better, or maybe it's a little worse. It's just right, just like the other one. Hey, they both taste great and they give you all those vitamins, but the thing is they're doing it in different ways. So they may both seem just right, but it's just not physically possible.
Kellogg's Just Right. For the perfect blend of 100% nutrition and great taste, no other cereal is just right.
Of course, I've been wrong before.
The only way to travel is Cadillac style.
Right now, leasing is smarter than ever because your Cadillac dealer is offering remarkably low monthly payments when you lease a sporty new Eldorado, as well as other selected Cadillacs. Just ask about Smart Lease. Cadillac style.
Cadillac, Cadillac, Cadillac style. Cadillac, Cadillac style.
Stacy, they're here.
Don't waste time. Let Scrub-Free clean your bathroom. Its heavy-duty foam dissolves most dirt on contact so you can get out of there fast. Give yourself a break. Clean your bathroom, Scrub-Free. Okay, this is Maybelline Perfect Pen Eyeliner. It actually works like a felt tip pen. Thick lines, thin lines, whatever. You're in control. And isn't that nice for a change? Perfect pen. Smart, beautiful, Maybelline.
Jimmy! It's Jimmy! Happy birthday, buddy!
Sounds like you're in the next row.
With 30 free minutes from U.S. Sprint,
Happy birthday, Jimmy.
you can afford to talk to more relatives
Just like he's in the next room.
than ever before.
Happy birthday, Jimmy.
Tell him we had asparagus. He loves asparagus.
Happy birthday,
Happy birthday, Jimmy.
Okay, everybody, we're going to sing happy birthday.
Ready? Set?
To get your 30 minutes of free long distance, pick up the phone right now. Call U.S. Sprint and switch.
It's Viva Miami, the night of super sounds with Julio Iglesias, Willie Nelson, Herb Alpert, Linda Ronstadt, Carlos Santana, and more. It's America's hottest music Saturday.
I know how to pleasure a man.
A lusty, daring adventure starring Emma Samms, Michael York, and Oliver Reed. The Lady and the Highwayman, Sunday.
WRAL-TV, Raleigh, Durham, Fayetteville.
It's North Carolina's finest at the Raleigh Civic Center, the Raleigh Antiques Extravaganza, and it's all this weekend. Come enjoy a part of our heritage.
I feel like I play a role in the customers that I have over here at North Hills, is a role of a friend and a pharmacist, and somebody that will guide them and instruct them in whichever way they need to go. I think it's a very big benefit to our customers, especially your elderly ones that's on a fixed income. It keeps their cost of the medications down. If they need to see a physician, if they're having a reaction, and they need help locating the physician, then I feel like that's part of my responsibility, is to help that customer.
It's time for the Rent America Inventory Blowout. Clean up at Rent America on great deals like this Whirlpool washer-dryer combo for only $16.99 a week. Or open this new flyer and get great savings like 50% off your first month's rent. Or save on 4 weekly payments. Or even 1 month free on select items. There are even specials on items like these. So call now and get free delivery today, because at Rent America, the Inventory Blowout means extra savings for you.
How dangerous is the newest Be Happy drug to hit the club scene? Watch USA Today on TV.
Weeknights at 11:30 on WRAL-TV.
This is a CBS News special inauguration report. From the nation's capital, here again is Dan Rather.
And the parade is about to begin. George Bush is out of the Capitol. He's finally gotten the congressman to stop talking long enough to get himself out of that luncheon in Statuary Hall. And he's in the presidential limousine for the trip back to the White House. Now, this is a custom that dates back to the first inauguration of George Washington, although George Washington walked back, as we said, after his inauguration there in New York City where that took place. President Bush and Vice President Quayle will be escorted by the co-chairs of the inaugural committee, Bobby Holt and Penny Percy Korth, Major General Donald Herbert, Chairman of the Armed Forces Inaugural Committee, military units, members of the Supreme Court, and members of the Joint Congressional Inaugural Committee, including Senator Wendell Ford of Kentucky, pure Kentucky, as they say on the license plates, who's chairman of the Congressional Inaugural Committee. As you see, the motorcade is beginning to form up with the police motorcycle outriders. So all those people along the parade route, Charles Kuralt, who've been restless as minnows out there for these long hours, are about to see what they came to see today.
Yeah, I guess you said this started in 1789 with a little impromptu cavalcade, escorts for General Washington after he became president. I guess it's just human, isn't it? After something as momentous as the inauguration of a president, people don't want to just go home and call it a day. And the presidential parade, which really formally began with Madison's inauguration here in Washington, has grown bigger and bigger and bigger. And I think it's safe to say that we're going to see the granddaddy of them all this afternoon. It is 40 minutes late, but it's going to be quite a show with 55 bands and 78 floats and of course the star attraction who's there in our picture, the new president.
Well, Bob Schieffer is there as the presidential limousine, the presidential motorcade back to the White House. This is not formally and officially part of the parade, mind you. This is the escort back to the White House for the new president. Bob, George Bush smiled and waved to the crowd. There's a large crowd in front of the East side of the Capitol, but there were some folks there, and he smiled and gave it a presidential wave.
He sure did, and this is just an enormous entourage with the president, Dan. I was watching as they formed up out here, and ahead of the limousine in which President and Mrs. Bush are riding are count them, five truckloads of cameramen, and then, of course, the Secret Service agents trailing along behind in two open cars. They are stopped now. They're still on the Capitol grounds as such, and about 100 yards, or 50 yards, I would say, from leaving the Capitol grounds. But now the whole motorcade has stopped here as they get this thing formed up. That was part of the delay back here, was just getting all these motorcycles, all the police units and so on in line after the President and Mrs. Bush got into their car. They sat for almost about 5 minutes, I guess, just behind the Capitol here, sat in the car while all of the people that go ahead of them in this parade formed up.
Bob, if I may, let me suggest, as I sometimes like to do, that with this wonderful shot, perhaps you can't see it from up there, from high above Pennsylvania Avenue, and as the new president's motorcade begins to head back to the White House, followed by the parade, let's watch and listen for a moment. This view that you're seeing, this long pullback there, look on Pennsylvania Avenue. Now, we're roughly at Louisiana and Constitution, our location. We hear those bugles in the background. We start talking a little because the music hasn't quite caught up with the motorcade, but it's beginning to do so. U.S. Army band called Pershing's Own, after General Blackjack Pershing, hero of the Mexican of World War I, also of forays into Mexico. The Army band followed by the U.S. Army Honor Guard, then the U.S. Marine Corps Honor Guard, the National Presidential and Vice Presidential colors, then the Navy Honor Guard, the Air Force Honor Guard, Coast Guard Honor Guard, the Old Guard Pipe and Drum Corps.
Then an awful lot of reporters and camera crews before you finally get to the President of the United States.
You know, Charles, well, if I love a parade, that's true. I'm a sucker for these parades, but, I don't care who knows it. They like it today, Inauguration Day. Well, I'm from school, I'll tell you, if you don't get a lump in your throat about this, then about what?
It's going to be it's going to be quite a show. Mind you, this is just the escort. There's still a parade behind all this.
Exactly right. We all know, our British cousins, they're very good at pageantry. Sometimes we're accused of not being very good at pageantry, except maybe at halftime of football games. But on inauguration days, we've gotten better, as we're about to see and hear. Ed Bradley at the other end of Pennsylvania, and some of the Bush children have already arrived there, have they not, Ed?
Yeah, Dan, we've been watching the bus loads, about 3 or 4 of them now. The last one's just out front, pulled up with a lot of the VIPs who were up at the ceremonies on the Hill.
Excuse me, Ed, what's this now? A hot dog truck apparently has caught fire there. Business apparently so good that the thing heated up. I don't mean to jest about something that could be dangerous. Can you see that, Ed, that hot dog?
I see it on the line, but I don't see it from my position. I can see it on the monitor.
Well, we want to stay pretty calm about this, but with that many vehicles crowded in there, we hope the fire department gets on the case soon, because it could work into kind of a dangerous situation. There, it's a hot dog truck caught fire.
Yeah, it's nowhere near this position, that much I can tell you. It's not on this position on Pennsylvania Avenue.
Yeah, this is happening between the presidential reviewing stand in front of the White House and the Capitol. Fortunately, it's a little off the actual, well, I don't know. I started to say off the parade route, but I think it's right on Pennsylvania Avenue. They've cordoned off the area. Well, for the moment, this is is no big deal. It doesn't appear to be, except, of course, for the person running that hot dog stand. And there seemed to be a motorcycle right next to that. Somebody apparently given up his motorcycle.
There's always something like this, isn't there, Dan? There's some little contretemps at every inauguration. At Lincoln's inauguration, there was a brief fuss, turned out to be just a spectator falling out of a tree.
Here, I think we're going to see, I don't know whether you can get a shot of it. You're talking about the reporters. Behind the Capitol, we see the trucks. Or behind these policemen you're seeing on the screen now, and this B, these motorcycle outriders are clearing the way with, of course, Old Glory and the presidential colors there in front, the Washington, D.C. flag to the motorcade's right to your left. Then the band, the U.S. Army band, Pershing's Own, right behind that. President Bush, Vice President Quayle being taken back to the White House. I guess we can get a shot of that herd of reporters. Say herd, they're all herded aboard a flatbed truck so they can take their pictures.
There they are.
Now, there's been some talk, Charles, of Vice President Bush walking part of the way along the motorcade route. Been some talk of that, as Jimmy Carter did during his inauguration. Well, Susan Spencer is on the parade route, actually in the parade. Susan, you had to break up, as we sometimes do, with that highly mobile camera. You're looking like the Minnesota girl you are, because it's pretty cool down there.
It is pretty cool down here. Nobody is happier to see this parade start than we are, believe me. We've been waiting up in the plaza where it seemed like for hours they were playing sort of limousine ballet, getting everybody organized so that this would proceed smoothly once it did get underway. I don't know how good a shot you have from here, Dan, but the car that the new president is riding in is really as interesting a unit in this parade as anything else. This is a $600,000 car, if you can believe that. A black Lincoln Town car that was hand-built especially for George Bush. George Bush being quite tall. This car is about 2.5 inches taller than most limousines, armor-plated, equipped with every known gizmo, including, we are told, the ability to deal with a nuclear launch if one wanted to from the back seat. We certainly don't anticipate anything like that.
Well, Susan, we talked about that this morning. We see the president waving out of that new super limousine. And they said that he could actually hit the nuclear button if he had to, but Charles and I never could figure out what happens if he goes into a tunnel or he passes over an overpass. Any guarantee the thing would work under those conditions?
Well, I have no idea. I worry more about the power window mechanisms, you know, just where this is all located.
Well, I wonder if the lemon law applies to this thing.
I don't think we have to worry. I'm about to fall off this truck. I'm sorry. I don't think we have to worry about this breaking down along the way. You know, they retired the one that President Reagan had, his limousine. It had 60,000 miles on it. So any of you with cars with 60,000 miles, you might want to think about getting rid of them.
I don't know, Susan. At home in Texas, they say there are two kinds of people. One that fix things and the other that throw things away.
Well,
a car with only 60,000 miles on it just barely broken in by my standards.
Well, one would think, but in any case, the new president, it may also have been just because he might not have been very comfortable in that other car. And most people always assume that Ronald Reagan was the taller of the two men just because he was such a towering personality, when in fact George Bush is a couple of inches taller. So
well, we're going to try to get, excuse me, Susan, I didn't mean to interrupt there, but it brings up, Charles has some information on the heights of the president. I was surprised, Charles. George Bush is 6'2", which is taller than President Reagan, who was over 6 feet. But George Washington was also 6'2", the only other George we've had as president.
Yes, John Adams, who was about 5'7", complained that nobody could ever treat him presidentially after such a tall, commanding figure as George Washington. Our smallest president was little Jimmy Madison, who was, I think he was about 5'3" or 4" and weighed less than 100 pounds, and he's still has a large place in our history. But it is nice that our tall president has a comfortable back seat to ride in. I think, however, it's a better view of us for him than it is of him for us. You notice those are tinted windows, and you really can't see the president very well. It's not a wonderful car for seeing our new president in.
Well, they'll make some adjustments maybe as time goes along. The parade, the presidential motorcade back to the White House, the escort back to the White House with the parade coming behind it, is finally formed up and beginning to roll. We'll give you the look and listen through the afternoon. Right now, time for me to say our parade coverage will continue. in just a moment.
To see how a bathroom gets this shiny clean, you have to go back to the beginning. To fresh-scented Lysol Basin Tub and Tile Cleaner. Lysol has the power to cut through dirt and soap scum, and it disinfects. Try Fresh Scent Lysol. It's how the shiniest bathrooms get their start.
New Light Scent Love My Carpet. The light scent not to be made light of. It's tougher on tough carpet odors than Arm & Hammer Light. Light Scent Love My Carpet. Delightful.
Hot Nestle Quick, made with real milk. Just seconds in your microwave. And a little warmth goes a long way.
Susan, can we talk?
Sure, Dad.
You notice anything different about Mom?
She's acting pretty wild for her age.
Well, I don't just mean the roller skates.
And the motor scooter. She even borrowed my new dress. Come on, Dad, what is it?
A balanced diet with the right vitamin nutrition helps people get more out of life. Some are finding Kellogg's Product 19, 100% of 12 vitamins.
Well, in an inelegant phrase, we're dumping out of the commercial because President George Bush is out of his limousine and is walking in the motorcade.
Yes, now I do.
He must have heard us say that we couldn't see him very well. He's going to be... It was just about at this same point that Jimmy Carter decided he would walk.
This is live and direct from Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C. The 41st President of the United States, George Bush, with his overcoat on, and the blue-coated Mrs. Bush at his side, strolling behind one of the Secret Service cars. And Susan Spencer is right in front of all this. Susan?
Well, Dan, as you can see, the new president is standing up and waving, and the crowd is responding just as anybody would hope that they might. This is, of course, what everybody was hoping would happen. And, you know, we've heard a lot this week about how this president wanted to be spontaneous. And I think we're going to have a lot of sort of semi-planned spontaneous events. But he's walking alongside the limousine. And I don't know, I wouldn't be too surprised if at some point here he didn't decide to get into the crowd. This, of course, makes the Secret Service absolutely crazy. On the other hand, he's the president now, so what can they do?
They can keep looking left and right, as that Secret Service man just ahead of him to President Bush's right is doing right now. Of course, that's what these brave men and women get paid to do. That is, stay alert and keep looking and scanning for possible trouble. There's some of the crowd that has waited for a long, long time out on that wind and cold to see the new President of the United States. Now, these are people who did not pay money to see the parade. This morning, we saw a lot of the so-called swells up there in front of the swearing-in ceremonies, in front of the platform. And you'll see them again at the reviewing stand, so-called heavy lifters, which is political parlance for those who contributed mightily to the party. But these are rank-and-file Americans along the parade route. And President Bush, who comes into the presidency, I would say in about as good a shape as anybody who's ever come into it, with the possible exception of Gerald Ford, who was such a good athlete. Because let's don't forget that George Bush was a pretty good athlete himself, played baseball in college, still runs quite a bit. And if necessary, he could go 3 or 4 miles over brush and timber because he's used to running quite a bit. Well, Ed Bradley, you can't see it because you're from your place there in front of the White House. You can't see it with your naked eye in front of the reviewing stand, but it may be a while before the president's motorcade gets back to your location, since he and Mrs. Bush are taking this time to walk.
Yeah, you know, Dan, I think this is something the Secret Service is going to have to get used to. Susan was mentioning these planned opportunities of spontaneity. Of course, we knew that there was a possibility that President Bush and Mrs. Bush would get out of the car and walk. It was just a matter of where it would take place. The Secret Service, their spokesman, said that if they had their way, he'd never leave the White House. But, of course, George Bush is not that kind of man. The president has made it clear that he likes to go out to Chinese restaurants, among others, and that he plans to do that when he is in the White House, when he wants to. So I think you're going to see a lot of this kind of spontaneity. You know, I think back to Jimmy Carter and watching him walk down Pennsylvania Avenue with Mrs. Carter and the conniptions the Secret Service went through. The first real spontaneity that we saw in a presidential parade goes back to Thomas Jefferson, and that was before the Secret Service, obviously, when some mechanics from the Navy Yard decided to jump into the parade and march along with the president. That was real spontaneity.
It was indeed. Now, as you perhaps see on your monitor, Ed, President and Mrs. Bush have gotten back into this brand new presidential limousine, the big Lincoln, it cost so much, and now they've started to ride again. Come back here, this is happening just right behind our anchor position in front of the west front of the Capitol, just, maybe 150 yards, 200 yards at most, right behind us here. President Bush, Charlie, really seemed to enjoy that, and I think you and Susan are right, and Ed also for that matter, when you say that's the kind of spontaneity. Susan pointed out that it's not genuine spontaneity, and that often the president has to sort of tip off the Secret Service what he's going to do. But we're likely to see more as opposed to less of that sort of thing. Leslie Stahl is on the White House lawn with Neil Bush, one of President Bush's sons. Leslie?
Talk about spontaneity, Dan. I'm here with Neil Bush, as you said, but also his 2-year-old son, Pierce, and this is real spontaneous television. Let me ask you, Neil, about your parents, and what kind of stylistic changes beside the spontaneity we're likely to see that separate them from the Reagans?
Well, I'm not going to talk about separation from the Reagans. My parents will have their own style, and my mother is just very open in the candor that she has. Hey, Pierce, can you say hi? Say hi. Say hi to Grandma and Grandpa, wherever they are. Ganny and Gampy's walking down the... Oh, they were walking down the street. Isn't this exciting? But you're going to see a very open White House. You're going to see lots of little guys like this running around, and we're going to have another, the 11th grandchild in a couple of weeks. So it's just exciting to be here.
We're told that your mother has arranged for 24 Bushes to sleep in the White House tonight. Is that true? Do you all each get your own room, as I was told?
That's my understanding. I think there are going to be a few closets that are converted into bedrooms. I know my brother Marvin's sleeping in the Lincoln room with his wife Margaret.
How come he got the Lincoln room?
I'm not sure if there's a superstition there. I don't know what it is. I'm just happy to be under the roof. It's going to be very exciting for all of us to move in. I hope the federal property isn't destroyed in any significant way by all the action. But we're just very excited about today, and Mom's going to be a great First Lady. Pierce, what do you think?
Pierce, what do you call your grandparents? Pierce?
Nobody. Nobody? You call him Grandpa?
No.
What do you call him?
Nobody.
You don't call him nobody. What do you call him? You call him Grandpa?
No.
You call him Gampy?
No.
Oh, yes, you do, you silly.
This is what it's going to be like around here, Dan, for the next 4 years at least.
I'll throw a few kids off the podium. What do you call him, Pierce?
Nobody.
Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you, Dan.
Neil Bush. The Bush grandchild.
Okay.
Many of us have been there. Always you hope your child will say exactly what you want him to say, but it almost never happens that way. Marvelous scene there on the front of the White House. And I'll be interested to see, Charles, whether any of the Bushes come back with a report. The Reagans, these reports, they thought they saw the ghost of Lincoln in the Lincoln room, and President Reagan said not too long ago he wasn't kidding about that. So maybe we'll have a fresh report from the Bushes about whether that ghost does or does not exist. Really, I didn't know that. And as the presidential motorcade with President Bush and Mrs. Bush, who walked for a while now back in the limousine making their way along Pennsylvania Avenue, we'll be back, right back, after these words.
Susan, can we talk?
Sure, Dad.
You notice anything different about Mom?
She's acting pretty wild for her age.
Well, I don't just mean the roller skates.
And the motor scooter. She even borrowed my new dress. Come on, Dad, what is it?
A balanced diet with the right vitamin nutrition helps people get more out of life. Some are finding Kellogg's Product 19. 100% of 12 vitamins and minerals. Feel good about yourself.
Not the rubber dress.
Feel like 19 again.
I am not going to take it anymore.
Sure, Metamucil works.
I'm not going to take it anymore.
But it's gritty.
I'm not going to take it anymore.
No more.
Now there's low-calorie Citracel Regular. Look, Metamucil is gritty. It won't all go through the strainer. But the fiber in Citracel pours through. And no fiber laxative is proven more effective, not even Metamucil.
I don't take it anymore. I take Citracel.
Citracel Orange or low-calorie Regular.
The only way to travel is Cadillac style.
Right now, leasing is smarter than ever because you can lease a new Cadillac Eldorado, Seville, STS, or Brome for much less than you expect. Just ask your Cadillac dealer about Smart Lease, Cadillac style.
You work here? On Newhart, Stephanie gives Michael the boot.
You can't break up with someone just because they're working in a discount shoe store.
And it's Kate and Allie, and Kate's facing 40.
Tattletale.
And a career crisis.
I don't have any special schooling, training, or experience.
Could always run for vice president.
Monday.
WRAL-TV, Raleigh, Durham, Fayetteville.
Hi, this is Cliff Robertson, inviting you to become a host family for the American Intercultural Student Exchange. For information, call 1-800-SIBLING.
Hi, everybody. All this week on Live, be sure to join me, Regis, and Kathy Lee, along with our special guest, Academy Award-winning actor Rod Steiger, from his new hit movie called The January Man. Plus, comedian Martin Short will tell us about his latest film with Dick Nolte, Three Fugitives. We'll also talk with the fine actress Teresa Russell, former TV angel Cheryl Ladd, and we'll tell you how to fight fatigue so that you'll never be tired again for the rest of your life. All of it coming up on Live.
Monday at 9 on WRAL-TV 5.
I'm a mother, and I know what works for me and my family to help relieve coughs due to colds or flu, Creomulsion and Creomulsion for children. And I've heard about recent hospital tests that again proved the effectiveness of the all-natural active ingredients in Creomulsion cough syrup. Doesn't your family deserve this proven natural cough relief? Soothing Creomulsion and gentle Creomulsion for children. Natural cough care that's been trusted for 3 generations.
Catch the Late Night Combo on WRAL-TV, USA Today, and the Pat Sajak Show. Weeknights on WRAL-TV.
This is a CBS News special inauguration report. From the nation's capital, here again is Dan Rather.
And the motorcade carrying President Bush and Vice President Quayle makes its way slowly with a chance as best they can for everyone along the route to see the new president and vice president inside their cars. Now, those of you who have been with us know that President Bush and Mrs. Bush, the new First Lady, got out and walked for a while. And what you may not know is that the new Vice President, Dan Quayle, and his wife, Marilyn, got out of their car for a brief time and walked along, and we may or may not see them do that again. Joining us here, us being my old friend Charles Kuralt, who's with me here this afternoon in our CBS News anchor booth, is Washington Post columnist Sally Quinn, the author of, among other books, the novel Regrets Only. Sally, good to see you again. We always consider you one of ours since your great time on the CBS Morning News. What's the style of this Bush administration so far, insofar as we can make it out?
Well, I just think it's a lot more relaxed than the Reagan style. And I thought it was interesting when, during Bush's speech today, which I thought was really extraordinary, he talked a lot about, I made some notes about it because I thought it was so stunning. We're not the sum of our possessions, and, you know, we don't want to just leave our kids a bigger car. And he really made a point of talking about we're going to get away from this whole era of opulence and money, and whether the Reagans really wanted to portray that image or not, I think a lot of it centered around the clothes, the cars, the money, the glitz, the Hollywood, the glamour, and all of that. And I think that's gone from Washington. The Bushes are Washingtonians. I mean, they've been here for almost 20 years, and they're sort of good old next-door neighbors. They go to Chinese restaurants. They dress the same way. Washington is a very low-key town. People don't have glamorous parties. I think if you had a limousine, unless you have a White House car, you drive around in a limousine, you get laughed out of town. I mean, people just don't live that way, and one of the reasons is nobody has any money. people in the Congress, on the Hill, and the administration, the journalists. Nobody makes anymore. That's why Mike Deaver got in such trouble, because he actually tried to make a few dollars.
Well, it's a pretty good point about the understatement. Mr. Charles is chuckling away at that. And
journalists don't have any money. Is that the part that made you laugh?
I think it's the thing that George Bush, for example, he's never tried to duck it or dodge it. Certainly when asked about it, that he considers himself a child of privilege in that he knows that his family had more than most people did. However, he learned coming up a kind of understated sense of quality. We don't want to dwell on clothes, but George Bush, like Cary Grant, wears the sort of suits that they don't call attention to themselves, but if you happen to pay attention to it, you'd note that it's a well-made suit. Pretty much the same with Barbara Bush, isn't it?
Well, I think you talked about his upbringing, and I think that has a lot to do with his own style. I mean, he's very much, if you saw his mother today in the crowd, she looked very much to the manner born, and the whole way that people like that behave is understated, play down your money, don't dress ostentatiously, don't wear, as someone yesterday at a lunch I went to for the Bush kids had on daytime diamonds. This is a Texan. So I think the whole attitude is just don't call attention to yourself. And politically, it's the same way. I think that's one of the things that's been going on with Bush for the last few years. He has been vice president. His role has been vice president. Play it down. Your time will come. And it's interesting what's going on in Washington right now, Dan. The whole town has just gone in the tank for George Bush. And here is a town that has been really anti-Bush for certainly the last year during the campaign. Who is this person out there that we don't know? I mean, for 8 years, George Bush has been in a bottle, and now he's free at last.
Well, they read the election returns pretty well in Washington, though, don't they? Sally Quinn, we hope you'll stick along with us a bit, Sally. We want to go to Susan Spencer right now, who's riding along up Pennsylvania Avenue, right in front of the car carrying President Bush and Barbara Bush. Susan?
Chris?
Susan?
Dan, I'm having a little bit of trouble hearing you. It's partly because a lot of people are yelling as we go by. The people by now down here know that up there George Bush got out of the car, and he was expected to get out of the car, if at all, somewhat further down. There's a little bit of anticipation that he may try and do that again. You know, we've said a lot about the weather, and it is cold, and it is windy, but we have at least not been out here since 6 o'clock this morning, which an awful lot of these people have. There are a lot of children in the crowd. Washington, after all, is not Pasadena. You know, we don't get these parades very often, and so there's a great deal of enthusiasm out here. I also noticed, as we went by, that there are a number of political signs. Keep abortion legalism on which you see an awful lot of. Bring back the ERA. So there are apparently some folks who feel that the new administration is going to give a chance for some other people to be heard, maybe that haven't been heard a little bit in the last 4 years.
Susan Spencer riding along with the presidential motorcade, which is ahead of the inaugural parade. Harry Smith is at 9th in Pennsylvania, where the president's car is just going by.
Just gone by, Dan, and we're here with a bunch of schoolgirls from Miami who have literally been standing out here since 9 o'clock this morning, and that's more than 6 hours ago. Natalie Guerra is one of the schoolgirls. Did you see the president?
Yes, I did.
Did you see Mrs. Bush?
Yes.
Was it worth the wait?
Yeah, it was. I was dying to see him.
What about your friends? What do they think? Hey, girls, was it worth the wait?
Yeah, it was.
Definitely worth the wait. I think they may be almost too cold to tell. And now just, if we can go ahead and pan over here, there's the vice president. He's got a microphone, Dan.
I thought he said hello, Harry.
He's hooked up to some kind of a public address system, and he's been talking to the crowd through the
out of the car again is President Bush and Mrs. Bush. So this is the second time they've been out today. Vice President Quayle and Mrs. Quayle have been out once before as well. We'd had some indication even before the motorcade started back. Oh, there's a nice scene. Making sure that the people up in the high windows get away. Hello. There's some indication that President Bush might stop and get out of his car and pay his respects to the Congressional Medal of Honor winners. Those of you who saw our coverage of the actual swearing in may remember what was one of my own favorite shots of that coverage, a cutaway of a couple of Congressional Medal of Honor winners, bravest of the brave, who were there for the swearing in today. And there's a collection of Medal of Honor winners here for this inaugural parade. Now, Susan Spencer is right in front of this walk, Susan. And, boy, to say that President Bush appears to be enjoying this is an understatement of the first order. 12 viewers and listeners, keep in mind that Susan Spencer has
people down here obviously are
fairly tough line of
very
work.
excited. As we passed one of the hotels or buildings along the way, we noticed that people were standing on the roof yelling, and he got more excited, of course, when the President and Mrs. Bush got out of the car. I noticed a few minutes ago that the limousine is going rather fast. They were almost running to keep up.
Well, Susan, Mrs. Bush has on heels here, does she? She often wears low-quarter shoes, these sort of things. No, she has on heels. We were saying, Susan Spencer, Charlie, you've done that line of work some. That's fairly rugged to be riding in that truck with the wind blowing and the temperature down. And Sally Quinn helped me out here and describe the dress and coat that Mrs. Bush is wearing here.
Well, it doesn't look very warm. It's freezing cold out there, and it's very blustery. It's much colder than you had expected it to be.
Well, true, the President has a scarf on with his overcoat, but...
Well, you know, the other thing that First Ladies concern themselves with all the time is their hair. And this, so for Barbara, I don't know whether she's got a hairdresser stashed away in the back of that limousine, but when she gets out and in, she's going to have to worry about that, too.
Kathleen Sullivan is a block and a half away about from this walk. Kathleen, can you see the President and Mrs. Bush walking along, or not yet?
Well, not yet, but, you know, it's funny, this crowd has kind of been worked into a frenzy. They keep looking at us going, what's wrong? What's wrong? You know, there's no one announcing what's going on. And they're just kind of sitting there holding on and waiting their time. And every kind of band that's come by and done any kind of little trick or any little look to the crowd gets a huge applause. So these people are in a frenzy. And wait till they see. They do not know that George Bush is now walking down Pennsylvania Avenue, what seems to them within an arm's reach. So you'll hear a big, loud cry when they get to this point here.
The Bushes holding hands, walking behind the presidential limousine, now as President and First Lady on Pennsylvania Avenue. Sally, this is exactly the sort of thing you were talking about in the sense that it conveys an informality of style that was not associated with the Reagans, and that's not to be critical. The Reagans had their own personal style and were highly successful with it.
Well, I think the Bush's style is very much the Washington style, which is much more informal than the Reagan style. And it has been that way. I mean, it used to be in the old days at the White House, the people in the White House, the First Lady and the President set the style and the tone of Washington. Certainly during Nixon and LBJ, it was very much the Texas barbecue. But I think when the Carters came in and then the Reagans, they brought such a change each time that Washingtonians were left to fend for themselves, and so they've set their own style. Now comes a boy from our hometown, and so it's back to informal gatherings, lots of kids around. I mean, people have made a lot about children being involved in this administration, and they're not making too much of it. They are very much a part of the Bush family. The whole family scene is really important. You haven't seen that at the White House for a long time, and I think that there will be events where people bring their kids, and that's very much a Washington kind of thing, too.
Sally, you touched on something earlier that I hadn't thought about for a while. You know, it was always said that Lyndon Johnson was, of course, a Texan, but the fact is that Lyndon Johnson had lived in Washington most of his adult life. And George Bush, well, he was a Connecticut, Maine, and then a Texan, but George Bush has lived in Washington almost exclusively for, what, more than 25 years?
Well, George Bush is a Washingtonian. I mean, the way so many people from the establishment are. You know, people, the Reagans and the Carters both ran against Washington, and yet when you come to Washington, everybody here is from somewhere else, so you're really running against the people if you run against the Washington establishment.
Kathleen Sullivan, on the parade route, can you see the car now?
Yeah, they just came by, and both of them are leaning back and forth across the car. And you can see George Bush, he recognizes so many people in the car because there's no way that you can be quite that friendly through tinted glass. And people are reaching out, screaming back. Now, remember, these people don't know that he was just back a little bit. You know, they don't have a sense of disappointment because they just don't know that he was out walking. And I'm sure, you know, if he's been walking intermittently, you might hear again a scream if he stops again and gets out. These people are really thrilled. It was funny, Dan, just a while ago, they were just so worked up in a fever anticipation. William Rehnquist, the Supreme Court Justice, came by, and people were even screaming, Billy, Billy. This crowd is getting somewhat wild.
Well, Kathleen, you may have noticed at the swearing in this morning that the Chief Justice, William Rehnquist, who administered the oath to President Reagan, Justice Sandra Day O'Connor administered the oath to Vice President Quayle. Chief Justice Rehnquist had on a hat, some sort of topper. It sounded good. I never saw that kind of Chief Justice hat before, if that's what it was. Have you ever seen such a thing?
Well, I don't remember having seen it, but I can't swear that I have. But I did notice that very few of the people were wearing hats today. Marilyn Quayle was one of the few women who had on a hat. And
she had on a hat for a while and then took it off.
Right.
Well, Ed Bradley's at the reviewing stand where the Bush grandchildren are patiently waiting for the parade, and it won't be long now, Ed.
And I don't know if you said patiently, but what I see over there, I sure wouldn't call patiently. We've heard President Bush say what kind of White House he's going to have. Take a look at the grandkids. We heard Neil Bush talking with Leslie Stahl earlier about the grandkids running all over the White House. They've got all their robot mechanical toys up there. They've been the motorcycle police just came by a few minutes ago. They were taking pot shots at them. In the corner where they're moving down towards now, there's also a very small remote camera that is used in a lot of sporting events, and we've seen the kids going right up. The camera's no bigger than a finger, going right up to take a bird's eye view, if you will.
So, Ed, I don't know whether you can see it on your monitor there. I suspect you can. Vice President Dan Quayle and his wife Marilyn got out of their car again, and Mrs. Quayle, I noticed Sally Quinn had the blue hat back on now, and they walked for a while and now have gotten back in their automobile. Wonderful picture of the former Indiana senator, now Vice President of the United States, standing up on sort of the running board of the car and waving to the crowd. A young man who had, just soon to be 42 years old, who may be a future president of the United States, given the history of vice presidents. So, as the motorcade carrying our new president and vice president continues to make its way from the Capitol to the White House, we'll be right back after these messages, so stay with us.
If for years you've been itching to get relief from the discomfort of a dry nose, here's some good news. Nasal. It's not a decongestant. Nasal's a gentle moisturizing spray that soothes away dryness. So gentle that you can use Nasal as often as you like. So the next time your dry nose needs soothing relief, try Nasal moisturizing spray. It's what every dry nose has been itching for.
I'm a raisin broker. I know raisins, but I don't understand this Kellogg's Raisin Bran. 1 scoop of raisins in a package is plenty. Scoop and a half is really delicious. Scoop and 3/4 will make your head spin. So when Kellogg's went to 2 scoops, nobody could believe it. 2 scoops. I tell you, in the old days, we'd get half a scoop, we'd be dancing in the streets.
Fiber-rich Kellogg's Raisin Bran. 2 scoops is a lot of raisins.
Believe it or not, these 3 prunes have more fiber than this entire bowl of bran flakes. Prunes, the high-fiber fruit.
Peter Bogdanovich marries the young sister of his murdered Playboy centerfold girlfriend. It's in this week's People. Plus, the new Underground Railroad. Mothers and children running for their lives from allegedly abusive fathers. People, that's what we're all about.
To savor the flavor of melting cheese, mixed with ham, diced nice as you please, your casserole deserves cremette. To taste each tender clam from the sea, richly spiced and woo, garlicky, your clam sauce deserves cremette. Cremette pasta is made to hold on to every bit of the flavor you put into your recipe. So whether the recipe is cool or hot, when you've given it the best you've got, doesn't your recipe deserve cremette?
Chocolate is scrumptious when it crunches. That's why I love Nestle Crunch Milk Chocolate. That's creamy, blending, crispy, so dreamy. Gotta have it, it's so scrumptious. Love that chocolate when it crunches. Chocolate is scrumptious when it
a presidential and vice presidential motorcade back to the White House, making its way along Pennsylvania Avenue.
It's the U.S. Navy.
You hear in the background the Air Force march and theme. Off we go into the wild blue yonder. Well, President Bush, although he was a Navy flyer, not an Air Force flyer, because in World War II we had the Army Air Force, the Navy Air Force, Marines. We didn't have an Air Force. Knows what it means, that part of that song that goes to live in fame or go down in flames. And it turns out that George Bush has lived long enough and well enough to do both. Down in flames in the Pacific and name and fame. Kathleen Sullivan, as Vice President Quayle's car went by, I got the crowd was treated to a so-called talking car. Most people probably don't know that these limousines can talk, so to speak, and Vice President Quayle's did as he rode by.
Well, I don't know, Dan, if you saw that earlier in the parade, because, you know, obviously, you know, I'm down at the end. And all of a sudden, after he got back in, he must have picked up a microphone. He looked over and he looks at the crowd, and you see his mouth moving. You hear something. He says, "Thanks for coming." And then he looked over the other side. You know, nice of you to be here. Thanks for coming. And it kind of threw everyone because they heard Dan Quayle's voice. And it's funny, this country really doesn't recognize that voice, you know, unintroduced at any period of time.
Well, Charlie Carrault, we were talking earlier, Kathleen, perhaps you heard earlier in the day, about it's only been since President Harding in the 1920s that presidents rode automobiles along Pennsylvania Avenue, and it's only been since the 1960s in the Lyndon Johnson era that they've had the ability to speak from the limousines. Now, Lyndon Johnson, Charlie, you remember, favored the bullhorn for a long time. He'd get up on the hood of the car, and I mean literally, and talk through the bullhorn, having developed this technique when he was running for the Senate. Remember the story that when President Johnson was running for the Senate, he rented a helicopter to go over a shopping mall, and he shouted down to people over the bullhorn, "This is your United States Senator, Lyndon Johnson, speaking at you." And it was from that grew, our man grew this business of building these speakers into the limousines.
When he felt charged up, Lyndon Johnson didn't even need a bullhorn, did he?
True enough. Well, Susan Spencer, we're getting closer to the White House now with the presidential motorcade back part of this.
We're about to go on.
Lost our picture there for just a second.
Here we are.
We're not about to go on, Susan. We're on.
We're on. We're very informal out here.
Well, that's in keeping with the new Bush style.
I'm sorry, Dan, what?
I say that's our informality, keeping with the new Bush style.
Part of our problem is that we keep stopping and starting, as does the limousine, so we're having a little trouble. We just turned the corner in front of the Treasury building. We're coming up toward the reviewing stand. The crowds have gotten more enthusiastic as we've gone on, if that's possible. Also, it's magnified by the fact that we were going between government buildings. And at times there, you couldn't talk to somebody on the truck because the roar was so loud. You know, in the past, I don't know if you've already mentioned this or not, but in the past, some of these crowds have gotten out of hand. I think there were 2 inaugurations where people began keeping warm by drinking quite a bit and ended up basically following the new president into the White House, where they took a few things and went through various things. But we're coming right now to the reviewing stand.
Well, Susan, that brings to mind the all-time great party, if you want to call it that, and Herbert Collins, our historian who's with us here, can tell us all about it. The great Andrew Jackson inaugural party. They end all inaugural parties where they really trashed the White House, so to speak. Didn't they, Professor Collins? As we watch the President and Mrs. Bush get out of the limousine, this almost in front of the White House.
Right. The Jacksons went over the window, Andrew Jackson did, and went to Gadsby Tavern and spent the rest of the day there. And so he wasn't
escaping
around.
the crowds.
He escaped the crowd.
Celebrate that.
In fact, he stayed there the second time in the White House.
Well, this was Andrew Jackson, who was president of the United States from 1828 to 1836.
29, that's right.
1829 to the start of 1837, 28 and 36 campaigns, and they had that party in which they literally did wreck the White House. Right now, this live and direct from 1989, Barbara Bush trotting, literally trotting from one side of the street to the other to shake hands with the crowd. President Bush walking. This is at least the 3rd time he's been out of his car today. The informal Bushes, with, as President Bush said in his inaugural address today, a new breeze blowing, wanting to carry on the traditions, the policies of the Reagan presidency, but at the same time mix it with a little modernity of his own, new directions of his own. Animatedly pointing to some friends and blowing kisses to those in the crowd. A reminder the Bushes have been in politics a long time, a lifetime, virtually, and they know a lot of people, and a lot of those people are here today to help them celebrate.
Yeah, these are not just strangers they're waving to. It's clear that Mrs. Bush is pointing out old friends to her husband, and he hears and sees them and points that way and waves and smiles. Oh, he's having a wonderful, they're both having a wonderful time.
Well, Ed Bradley, you can see this happening now because they're so near the White House. They've made that turn on Pennsylvania Avenue around the Treasury Building, haven't they?
Yeah, they have, and you can start to see the buzz of excitement in the people across the street in the reviewing stand. They know that they're almost here, and they're really getting excited. You can hear that roar going up now. It's just, I think the people in the reviewing stand across the street are getting their first glimpse of the President and the First Lady. They're right here now, just in front of us.
Are saying we love you dearly, and everybody in the stands are.
You know, one of the things that they're going to do, Dan, you talked about the new breeze that's blowing through. There's an old tradition, I'm told, is going to be revived, that they're going to have an open house tomorrow at the White House, where the President and Mrs. Bush will open the doors for anyone who wants to come. I mean, you don't need an invitation to come in, and I guess, I don't know if they're going to serve coffee or tea, or you're just going to walk doing a handshake, but you can come in.
Ed, let's watch and listen for a moment now as they play Hail to the Chief, as the new Commander-in-Chief and his wife, our new First Lady, walk on Pennsylvania Avenue. And up to the reviewing stand. One of those last handshakes with Dick Cheney, young Republican leader of the House from Wyoming, part of the Republican Party's future, and matter of fact, part of its present. He'll be having to carry a lot for the Bush administration up on Capitol Hill in the Congress, with the Republicans outnumbered in the House and in the Senate. And Mrs. Bush with the granddaughter. So they've arrived in the reviewing stand now, in the family section of the reviewing stand, and what we're going to be seeing over the next hour or so is the parade roll by in front of this reviewing stand. And Ed Bradley, you'll be in the catbird seat there as we see the Bush's grandchildren begin to move in, as they do almost any time grandfather and grandmother sit still for even a moment.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to see a lot of protocol here, Dan. Those first two chairs, the Bushes are on the left-hand side as I'm looking at it, the Quayles on the other side. The President came in and gave the old thumb jerk to one of the grandkids to get out, but Mrs. Bush picked up another grandchild and placed her right on her lap. They've got some T-shirts they've been giving out in there, Dan, that I heard this morning that someone said George Bush was going to try and bury that phrase, read my lips. But they've got some T-shirts that have been given out that are the souvenirs, I guess, for those in the presidential reviewing stand of the presidential, the bicentennial inaugural. And on the back of those T-shirts, it says, read my lips. So it's not quite ready to be buried.
Well, you may have seen as George Bush, our new president, got his overcoat off, that he was wearing his watch on his right hand. Now, we've already had some viewer call in and say, why does he wear his watch on his right hand? If you knew his baseball history, you'd know. He's left-handed. That's the reason he played first base. We won't get too deeply into it, but, you know, left-handers play first base because they can guard against hit to right field a little bit better. But this president is a left-hander, and that's the reason he wears his watch on the right hand. Which is our segue to say, our coverage of the George Bush 41st President of the United States inaugural parade will continue in a moment.
I've never been that much of a cereal eater, or even breakfast for that matter. But then I read 2 or 3 different articles about oat bran, and I thought to myself, why would you not eat this stuff?
Medical reports have shown oat bran can be important to your good health. Kellogg's Common Sense Oat Bran has more oat bran than any leading ready-to-eat cereal.
You know, I get up 15 minutes early just so I can do this.
New Common Sense Oat Bran, a sensible thing to do.
Why do you take aspirin more than once a week?
Because after one day of tennis, I can have 3 days of aches and pains. And when you take aspirin that often, you wonder about aspirin stomach upset.
Well, today, there's a better aspirin product for you. Try Buffered Bufferin. Better than plain aspirin because it's 100% aspirin, plus 3 buffers to help protect against stomach upset aspirin can cause.
You know, it really is better.
Try Buffered Bufferin if you take aspirin more than once a week.
This chandelier is being dipped in pancake batter and dried to prove that Advanced Palmolive Automatic cleans the toughest stuck-on foods in one wash without powder residue. Try Palmolive Automatic. Once is all it takes.
Madge!
I know what's coming next.
I soaked in it. Madge! I soaked in it. Madge! I soaked in it.
Well, it finally soaked in. Original or lemon lime. Palmolive softens hands while you do dishes.
Constipation is disaster, and that's the honest truth.
Jean Wright talks about constipation and Dulcolax laxatives.
I can depend on Dulcolax because it takes care of my constipation problems in a gentle, easy way. My doctor suggested that I try Dulcolax, and I did, and I was very happy.
Dulcolax suppositories can work in 15 minutes to 1 hour. Dulcolax tablets predictably overnight.
I wake up in the morning, and I get complete relief. Dulcolax brightens my day.
My favorite GM car I worked on. Kept it all these years, even after I retired. Every time my son looks at it, he smiles. Very popular at the time, I tell him. My boy's at GM now, building beauties like this one. One thing hasn't changed. We still build them to last.
GM cars have held their resale value better than any other U.S. make.
From high above Pennsylvania Avenue, where the parade is not only formed up, but beginning to move, President Bush and Mrs. Bush at the reviewing stand. You see the reviewing stand with the flags atop it just off to the right. That's immediately in front of the White House, looking toward Lafayette Square. Ed Bradley is watching what's going on right now in front of that very fancy reviewing stand, Ed.
Dan, you'll notice that Mrs. Bush is standing there without her coat, as is the president. That's one of the perks of being president and vice president, as the Quayles are, Mr. Quayle's taken off his coat. There are heaters under the table right in front of them where they and the grandchildren are. But you'll notice behind them and the rest of the reviewing stand, you won't see too many people taking their coats off back there because there are no heaters back there. They're seeing the first units start to come by now. These are the U.S. Park Police on the mounted policemen marching by the reviewing stand, trooping the colors of the command.
Well, we got our first view of one of the floats, Ed. We just got a glance of it there, but we'll be seeing a lot of them as this day goes along. The Park Police and, of course, the Chief of Police of Metropolitan Police Department of Washington, D.C., Maurice T. Turner, Jr., is along and moving in front of the President's box just about this time.
This reviewing stand, Dan, is also, it's mentioned with the heat that they have there. They don't have the problem. They tried to do it with solar heat when President Carter was inaugurated. And as you probably remember, it was a bitter cold day, which doesn't mean anything. But what did mean something was that it was cloudy. It was overcast. There wasn't much sunshine, so that solar heat didn't work.
We don't give solar heat, and the idea of solar heat a bad name, but part of the problem was they just rigged it up, actually got it going a few days before the parade, so we didn't really have a chance to get it in good working order. That flag float we saw a moment ago, Ed, I mentioned, we just got a glance of it. It's a replica of the United States flag. Riding on that float are Bob Hope and Chuck Yeager, now General Chuck Yeager, the famous Tusk pilot, who are Grand Marshals of the 1989 inaugural parade. There's the flag float. Bob Hope and Chuck Yeager, the official marshals of the parade.
You know, it's surprising. You would think that, I'm told that this is Bob Hope's first inaugural parade. As much as you connect him with politics through his work in entertaining the soldiers in World War II and the Korean War and in Vietnam, and you often see Bob Hope with whoever the president is. It's amazing that this is his first participation in an inaugural parade.
CBS News correspondent Harry Smith and anchor person of CBS This Morning is right along the parade route. And Harry, this is one long parade.
Well, the parade is really underway, and the crowd has warmed up a lot now that they really have something to see. The president and the vice president have gone by, and some of the units have gone by. And we ran into Margaret Rosengarten earlier today. What time did you get up this morning?
3 o'clock this morning.
And you drove all the way in from Philadelphia?
That's right.
My 11th inaugural.
4 hours to get here.
I've been to every
Have you ever seen an inaugural before?
No, this is my first one.
Did you get a good chance to see the president?
Oh, I most certainly did.
How does this all make you feel?
Oh, that feels me great. Makes up for the bad times we're going through.
Folks down here are pretty happy, Dan.
And indeed, they should be, Harry. The parade rolling along. You know, I know you agree, Harry, that one of the good things about our country is that we don't give military medals, combat medals, cheaply here. When you win a Medal of Honor, the United States of America, that you've really done something. Kathleen Sullivan is standing by with a reminder. 2 Medal of Honor winners in Freedom Plaza along Pennsylvania Avenue. Kathleen?
Dan, I'm also standing here with the one of the stars of Knight's Landing. Kevin, how are you?
Fine, I'm doing great. What a great honor to be a part of this parade today and the inauguration. Not only that, but sitting amongst Congressional Medal of Honor recipients is one of the thrills of my life.
Well, tonight, actually, you're hosting a dinner for these Medal of Honor recipients?
Yes, I'm the chairman for the National Salute to Hospitalized Veterans for 1989. And the American Legion and Veterans Administration asked me to MC and host the ball tonight for our Congressional Medal of Honor recipients. What a thrill it is for me.
Well, Admiral Stockdale, I understand that you were a POW for 7 years. Is that
Yes,
correct?
I was. I was in Vietnam in a prison camp from 65 till 73.
How many inaugurations have you come to see?
I've come to see, this is the 4th. I was awarded the medal in 76 after I got out of prison, and I came to Jimmy Carter's inauguration the 1st. And this is the 4th.
Lou Millette, you kind of go down in history, don't you? I mean, you led the last bayonet charge in South Korea, actually the last bayonet charge in the United States.
That's correct.
What was special? Why did they award you the Medal of Honor?
Pardon?
Why did they award you the Medal of Honor?
Because I led the troop. But I wouldn't be here if 100 men hadn't followed me. You know, I didn't do it by myself. No man does that kind of thing by yourself.
Why? Are you surprised you actually were in the armed services yourself, weren't you, Kevin?
I was in the Army in 62 to 64 as a military policeman in the Army. And that was when Vietnam broke out and all that. And I was fortunate enough to be one of the members of the military that stayed stateside. But I'd like to take this opportunity to thank everyone that was there and help along with our living memory of our hospitalized veterans who need help and support, love, and volunteerism.
Kevin Dawson, thank you. Gentlemen, have a good time today.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you very much.
Dan?
Thanks, Kathleen. Kathleen Sullivan with, among others, winners of the Congressional Medal of Honor. That's an interesting story about the man who led the last United States Army bayonet charge in Korea. Now, this on our monitor, you can see the flag float passing just in front of the presidential reviewing stand. The flag float with Bob Hope and Chuck Yeager saluting President Bush. At last night's gala, Charles, for my money, Chuck Yeager probably gave the best little talk, saying George Bush and I were both flyers during World War II, both named our airplanes after women we were fond of, and we have in common that we're both still interested in aircraft, and we're still with the women we married. Very nice patriotic speech. And Bob Hope, who always gets off good lines about presidents and the presidency, tends to get him off a little better about Republican presidents because he doesn't make any secret of the fact that he prefers Republican presidents. Now, former Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill, has just joined us in our anchor booth, and we'll try to give him a little equal time to that. But Uncle Sam has appeared between General Yeager and Bob Hope as they pass the reviewing stand. And behind Ed Bradley, the floats get better and better. The Rose Bowl parade, which may be the best parade in America, I guess, but they do it every year. These inaugural parades, the floats have to be, for the most part, built from scratch each inaugural time, once every 4 years.
This float was supposed to have been in the parade. This float, Dan, was supposed to have been in the inaugural parade in 1985, which was canceled because of the cold weather. So it was used as the backdrop in the indoor inaugural festivities that were held at the Capitol Center. Of course, General Yeager, as you know, has a lot in common with President Bush. They met a few years ago at a state dinner at the White House and discovered how much they had in common. Both former pilots, World War II pilots. General Yeager, of course, broke the sound barrier on that X-1 rocket back in 1947, the first man to break the sound barrier. He actively campaigned for President Bush this year. Boy, that is a big float, though, isn't it?
And a nice one. Well, with the wind whipping up and the temperature now down into the high 30s, hovering at 40 or just below that, the weather looks like it's going to hold. And as Uncle Sam strokes his beard, we'll take a commercial break.
This portion of CBS News' special inauguration coverage is sponsored by AT&T. From equipment to networking, from computers to communications, AT&T, the right choice. And by Nabisco and its many fine products. America knows Nabisco by heart.
Who's on first? On the Pat Sajak Show, that is. Watch and you could win big bucks and a magical vacation. See TV Guide for details and watch Pat late night. Get ready for an uplifting experience from Down Under.
Welcome to us, mate. That's definitely not Kansas.
Live the Australian adventure Saturday at Dolphin Cove.
WRAL-TV, Raleigh, Durham, Fayetteville.
It's North Carolina's finest at the Raleigh Civic Center, the Raleigh Antiques Extravaganza, and it's all this weekend. Come enjoy a part of our heritage.
Who will the fans choose as Pepsi's most valuable player of the ACC? You make the choice. Enter the Pepsi Diet Pepsi ACC sweepstakes and vote for the MVP. And your name will be entered in the sweepstakes to win tickets to next year's tournament, one of 7 exciting Pepsi Special Edition Pontiac Grand Prix, or one of more than 1,000 other prizes, including color TVs. Pick up a ballot at any Pepsi Diet Pepsi display. Make your choice and win, too.
It's here. Your WTRG key tag has a winning number, so put it on your keychain and listen to 100.7 WTRG FM.
With Jeff McKee and Mike on WTRG, you can win $100 instantly. Plus, a chance to win a trip to Hawaii on Delta. When we call your key tag number, call 860-100.7 within 10 minutes and you're a winner. And the winning number is 55.
Carry your key tag, tune in, and win from 100.7 WTRG FM.
It's a Friday night of fairy tale romance and family fortunes on WRAL-TV.
This is a CBS News special inauguration report. From the nation's capital, here again is Dan Rather.
And the parade is underway, marching in review in front of President Bush, our new First Lady, Barbara Bush, new Vice President Dan Quayle, and his wife Marilyn Quayle, all in the reviewing stand in front of the White House. And that's what you see in this screen behind us now. In the west front of the Capitol, just back over there, which had the swearing-in ceremony and was the center of so much activity early in the day, is now as abandoned as a drive-in movie theater at noon. Practically no one there. The whole center is shifted down Pennsylvania Avenue into in front of the White House. And with Charles Kuralt and me here in the booth is Speaker of the House of Representatives. Mr. Speaker, thank you for coming by.
Dan, it's a delight.
How many of these inaugural parades have you seen?
Well, I've been to 11 consecutive inaugurations, starting with Harry Truman in 1948. They seem to get a little more glamorous. I was thinking the other day, the largest one, this probably is, but the largest crowd that I can ever remember was when Harry Truman won. Of course, he was a 20-to-1 underdog, and when he won, everybody in America thought that they participated and were part. Excursions came down from Boston by train at about $12 a person, and the town was just jammed, and there was a lot of enthusiasm and excitement, and the speech wasn't that memorable that I can remember it so well. But
what you remember is winning.
What I remember was winning, absolutely. And I remember winning more than anybody in America. I had been the minority leader of the Democratic House, a Democrat, and for the first time in history, because of the great popularity of Harry Truman, the state went Democratic, and I became the first Democratic Speaker of Massachusetts. We changed the House from 160 to 80 Democrats to 200 to 122 Democrats to 118. So I always have love and affection for Harry Truman.
Mr. Speaker, I want to pick up on that, but let's watch and listen for a moment as some of the military units come by and give their salute. The United States Army Infantry, Old Guard, is completed here. This is what we came to see here.
Jack Kennedy was inaugurated, about 30,000 troops came in the night before to clean out the snow.
Now, each of the services will have their moment in front of the new Commander-in-Chief, beginning with the Army. The United States Army Color Guard has passed by the 29th Infantry Division, Light Infantry. The Army National Guard, representing the Army National Guard, the 352nd Civil Affairs Command from Riverdale, Maryland, passing by in front of President Bush. Presidential seal float. You see it just behind the band there. See the president? There it is. Presidential seal. Now, Ed Bradley, we hear someone speaking on a loudspeaker out in the direction of the platform. I think that's something new. Where is that speaker, and who's doing the speaking?
Dan, it's Bob Drummond, I think his last name is. He's actually on top of where we are, on top of our reviewing stand. He's got a booth, and he's enclosed in that one, and letting everyone in the reviewing stand know all of the particulars about the people who are coming by. Listen, Dan, I'm sitting here with one of the Grand Marshals of the parade, General Chuck Yeager. I said earlier, how cold was it out there?
Oh, it wasn't too bad. The wind was whistling a little bit. It really wasn't too uncomfortable.
You were telling me you met Mr. Bush when he was vice president at a state dinner a few years ago?
About 6-7 years ago, and you know, we were discussing World War II, and of course I was a fighter pilot in World War II, and we found out that we both enlisted in the military when we were age 18, and we took our pilot training as enlisted guys, and we both met a couple good-looking gals. In fact, we were so impressed, we named our airplanes after them in combat, promptly got shot down. In fact, both of us were shot down at about the same time, and Then we later came back and married those same gals we had named our airplanes after and are still married to them.
You still fly?
Yeah, I still fly a lot.
How old are you now?
I'm 66. I have a job at Edwards Air Force Base as a consultant test pilot. I do work on 16s, 15s, and other aircraft.
What impressed you about the parade as you were riding?
The people. I've never seen such enthusiastic people in my life, Ed. They just, you know, they're so enthused and, you know, it just makes you feel good.
I mean, you've seen a lot. You've done a lot. I know you ride the Pace Cars at Indianapolis.
Yeah.
Does this compare to any of the other things you've done?
It's the biggest by far of anything I've ever been exposed to, and the people are so enthused about the day, and it makes you feel very, very good, Ed.
Good. You looking forward to the night?
Yeah, it should be fun.
Well, good. It's good to have you with us.
Well, thank you very much. Man, that's really great out there.
I noticed you haven't taken your coat off yet.
Well, yeah, I don't want to let the cool out.
Barbara Bush with a hook 'em horn sign as the University of Texas Longhorn Marching Band passes by. The show band of the Southwest, as it's called. Now, that'll be followed by the Parsons Mounted Cavalry from College Station, Texas, representing Texas A&M College.
And that'll be followed by about 10 or 15 minutes worth of other Texas units.
Nothing wrong with that. The Yellow Rose of Texas. Well, to the strains of the Yellow Rose of Texas, let's listen as Leslie Stahl talks with another of Bush's sons, Jeb Bush. Leslie?
Dan, I've lured Jeb Bush, who's the second son, behind the reviewing stand to come and talk to us. And it's kind of breaking his heart because he went to the University of Texas. Jeb, you can see it on the little hook 'em. We've been watching the band on the little set, but I wanted to ask you, Jeb, did you have breakfast with your father? What did he talk about just before he became president of the United States?
Well, he didn't talk about anything different today than he normally does. We just talked about how the kids were doing and things like that. He was not, he's pretty serene about all this.
We're also here, Dan, with Jeb's daughter, Noelle, who's 11 years old. And I've told her that I gave her my question before we came on the air. I was going to ask her, what is her grandfather really like? Give us a secret about him.
Well, it's hard to describe him. It's just that he's very nice, and, you know, I love him a lot, and so does everyone else in his family. We all love him very much, and it's just the way he is that makes us all happy, you know, and we're very proud of him.
You know, we see a lot of pictures of you on his knee and hugging and kissing. Is that the way it feels to you, or is that something that you're doing because you know the cameras are on?
It's really true. I mean, we're not just doing that because the cameras are there. We really do this. We always, because we love each other very much.
Okay, Noelle. Thank you very much, Jeb. I'm going to let you go back and watch the parade. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Dan?
Leslie Stahl on the front lawn of the White House right behind the reviewing stand with Jeb Bush and one of the Bush granddaughters, the daughter of Jeb Bush. Dan Rather with Charles Peralta, and in our booth right now, the former Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill. We'll all be right back after these messages.
Well, my message to George Bush is, I think he's very well, excellently qualified for this job he's taking on. I wish him every good wish, and I know that the country is very fortunate to have a man of his experience, his devotion to his country, heading this country.
So when this fellow drove up in a shiny car, he got out, he had a shiny suit. He was in the business of selling telephone systems. He managed to convince me that it would be cheaper to own a phone system than to go on renting. So I bought one, and it broke down in a month. I couldn't find the man who sold it to me. The customers were mad at me. I don't know. If something works right, don't mess with it. That's what I say.
There's a special place inside our hearts for people that we know, friendships that have lasted, children as they grow. There were ways to wrap up laughter and keep it souvenirs. We'd always have a pocketful to share through all the years. Now for all the times you brought a smile, turn a grown-up to a child. These feelings we've known from the start. America's always known us by heart. All the good things still to come. We'll take each moment one by one. These feelings we've known from the start. America's always known us by heart. America knows Nabisco by heart.
Because women sweat too, there's Lady Speed Stick Antiperspirant. Wide coverage and speed stick protection that glides on dry. For wetness and odor protection that's hard to beat, but gentle for a woman. Lady Speed Stick. Protects you like a man, treats you like a woman. Now also available in soft lilac and aloe fresh scent. Lady Speed Stick.
Well, in front of the President's reviewing stand, the Texas Aggie Band has passed by, I think now, and the 4th U.S. Cavalry Regiment from Lubbock, Texas. Robert E. Lee High School Band from Midland, Texas, all represented, passing by in front of the official reviewing box. As this inaugural parade for the 41st President of the United States passes by. Now the first of the Indiana floats, State Seal of Indiana, to be followed by the Black Horse Troop from Culver Military Academy and the Culver Girls Academy from Culver, Indiana, the Huntington North High School Band from Huntington, Indiana, Dan Quayle's hometown, and the theme float, the theme of the inauguration, Peace, Prosperity, and Independence. All that will be passing by in front of President George Bush, First Lady Barbara Bush, our new Vice President, Dan Quayle, and Marilyn Quayle. Speaker Tip O'Neill with us here in the booth. You served in the House of Representatives with George Bush. You served 2 terms before he quit to run for the Senate. Let's speak candidly here. What kind of congressman was he?
George, as a matter of fact, almost I think his freshman year, he went on the Ways and Means Committee. So he had tremendous clout within his own party. He's been able to do that. Once you make the Ways and Means Committee, of course, you're a man to be watched in the Congress of the United States. He was a very talented fellow, very, very popular man. He was in the Congress of the United States. Stayed there for 4 years in the House, and of course went back to run for the Senate. Got a tremendously wide experience. I'd have to say he's a man of the government.
And now let's pause to watch and listen to some of the pride of Indiana. The young men and women of Indiana march by in front of that son of Indiana who's become our new Vice President. Bradley, this is the Huntington High School Band from Dan Quayle's hometown in Huntington, Indiana, where he went back after getting the nod from George Bush to be Bush's running mate and held what is now at least many famous news conferences.
It's interesting, Dan, that 2 things I noticed about this band. First, I thought we were going to lose a couple of the horses in the Culver unit that came by in front of them. I thought they did a real good job in keeping those horses under control.
Oh, Ed, I love this float. Look at this theme float. I love this thing.
That's beautiful.
Peace, Prosperity, and Independence. Float also appeared in the 1989 Rose Bowl parade.
You also had a handicapped saxophone player in the high school band from Dan Quayle's alma mater, playing the saxophone and being pushed along in a wheelchair, which was pretty nice, I thought.
Now, right behind, oh, I love that theme float. That's a beauty, isn't it? Now, Charlie, you can go to goat rodents and county fairs and a lot of things and not see anything beat that.
I think this is undoubtedly the richest, most gravy-laden of all the parades we've ever had down Pennsylvania Avenue. Speaker O'Neill, who's sitting next to me, has a longer memory than I have, but this is the flashiest parade I've seen on this street.
Speaker O'Neill, you also served...
There's no question about that. Something new every 4 years.
You also served in the House when you were Speaker of the House with Dan Quayle, who was a congressman before he became a senator, before he became vice president. What kind of congressman was he?
Well, actually, I can truthfully say I don't believe I ever met Dan Quayle. I knew he was the great golfer, but that's not unusual for the Speaker. I knew probably everybody on the Democratic side and probably 65 and 165 on the Republican side. Fellows that have served in the Congress and served in committees with him say he's a very able and talented fellow, and he got a bad deal in the fall. So let's give him a new start and let's see what he has and hope for the best for America.
Well, I have to be, a lot of people are saying amen to that.
Sure.
I want to, ooh. Take it away, Ed Bradley.
She tossed that one pretty high. There, she got it again. You can see the explanation from the President and Mrs. Bush. I mean, she tossed that thing almost as high as the presidential seal and came down with it.
Let me tell you, if you can't have a really good drum majorette for the Purdue University All-American Marching Band, where are you going to find one?
Here comes another one.
I guess majorettes, Charles Gerald, have gone a little out of fashion in the 70s and 80s. You still see them at certainly Big Ten and Southwest Conference football games and on the West Coast. They've gone a little out of fashion.
It's a high school thing, you know. In the little country high schools, frequently they don't have sports teams for the young women. And what they aspire to do is learn to twirl that baton. And some of them out there in the country get pretty good.
Well, we have the Purdue University All-American Marching Band, the Marion County Sheriff's Precision Motorcycle Drill Squad, then the Clay City High School Marching Band, Indiana. Let's take a listen. Well, if you saw the movie Hoosiers, you know who they are.
There are 49 civilian bands in this parade. If every band had come, which wanted to come, I suppose there have been 2,049. It takes a little political pull. You have to know somebody. And, of course, if you're from Indiana, you know somebody, the new vice president.
Not only in the bands on the
Congress at this particular time of the year after the election, he at least gets 3 calls from local bands. Can he see if he can use a little power to get them in the parade?
I suspect that's true, Speaker. Ed, you were about to say something.
Well, I noticed that there was one band in the parade still to come. It's the Strom Thurmond High School Band. The fact that the president's campaign manager, Lee Atwater, started his political career with Strom Thurmond probably helps him out. This is their second parade.
Well, they haven't come into view yet. What we're seeing here now is the end of the Indiana contingent, and the Purdue All-American Marching Band, Purdue, Notre Dame, of course the University of Indiana, Bobby Knight's Fighting Indiana Hoosier basketball team, known all over the country. Small to medium-sized state with more than its share of great universities. And as the Purdue band passes by in front of President Mrs. Bush, we'll be right back with more of this great parade. Great ones over there. I'm thinking about that cowboy from Wyoming that literally lassoed President Eisenhower when he was in the reviewing platform in the 1950s. There was that one we were recalling the other day with Ulysses S. Grant, in which it was so cold that the canaries in the wigwam literally dropped from the ceiling.
And the punch in the punch bowls froze, and all the marching bands froze to their tubas. That was a cold one. This is a piece of cake today for all these people.
You know, All around Washington today, it's been a great and a giant celebration for George Bush and Barbara Bush and the new Bush presidency, new Bush Quayle administration, a time of jubilation that stands out in contrast to the quiet scene at one of Washington's most popular monuments, the Wall, the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. A lone visitor came to reflect among the haunting marble walls that bear the names of the more than 58,000 Americans killed in Vietnam. Some sketch the names of the dead and the missing, and others come just to pause and remember. And they're doing this all the while the inaugural parade, and for that matter, the swearing in today at noon, went on and go on. A reminder, Charles, that we talked a lot about the great American system today, and what a marvelous and great thing in history it is that we're able to make these transitions of power easily, even under the worst of times, but a reminder that it doesn't come cheap.
That place, with one or two people there, it is, to me, more moving than everything else we've seen. That is, you go to that wall not expecting to feel strong emotion, thinking you're beyond that, and it just gets to you every time.
And Ed Bradley, at the reviewing stand, not too far from the wall, the Vietnam Memorial, this is the scene, and these are the sights and sounds.
This is the Auburn University marching band that's coming by now, Dan. You know, we heard President Bush say earlier that he was standing there and he heard someone say, Mr. President, and he was waiting for Ronald Reagan to step forward, and there was something between a gentle push and a kidney punch from Barbara Bush for him. She's doing the same thing here in the reviewing stand because he's very animated in talking to all of the people who are around him. And at one point, the head of the Auburn University band came by and gave the president a salute. The president didn't see it, so he's having to hold his salute until it's returned. Mrs. Bush gave him a nudge and pointed, and he returned the salute. So she's still giving him those gentle reminders.
And just behind President Bush, and Barbara Bush was just speaking to them, Jack Kemp and Mrs. Kemp. Jack Kemp, the Housing and Urban Development designee, soon to be the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, to be a Republican much watched in the Bush-Quayle administration. Well, we've seen the Patriots of Northern Virginia Colonial Regiment roll by, the American Legion Post from Massachusetts. The State Seal of Alabama has gone by. And Peggy Noonan, the lady in the sunglasses, George Bush's main speechwriter, and the
Cheryl Ladd.
You know, Ed, I think you're right. Somebody said to me in my ear, Peggy Noonan, and behind those look-back sunglasses, hard to tell. Cheryl Ladd was at the gala last night, Ed, as you saw, and gave the President and Mrs. Bush a great salute. Thanks for that pickup and catching me there.
I wonder how Cheryl Ladd is at speech writing.
Well, she's pretty good at speech giving because she gave a nice little talk last night. We were talking with Peggy Noonan, your new president's speech writer, who helped draft today's inaugural address. She'd be the first to say it was George Bush's work mainly and mostly, and indeed it was, but she helped to draft it. Perhaps we'll see her later on. And the Reverend Dr. Billy Graham apparently told another good story. He's a good raconteur, in addition to being one terrific preacher and prayer leader.
This is the Troy State University. They call the Sound of the South marching band. They represent the state of Alabama. This is one of those bands that didn't get to march in 1985 when it was called off because of the cold weather.
Well, following this Alabama contingent, the Sound of the South marching band from Troy State, be the Alaska contingent in Arizona, and on it rolls through the afternoon.
We're just in the A's. It goes alphabetically, I guess.
Battle Hymn of the Republic played here. one of Eric Severide's favorite historical stories, which has the added advantage of being true, is the Battle Hymn of the Republic we just heard there was written right on the steps of the Willard Hotel, which is not far from this reviewing stand. The Willard Hotel has been completely redone, as you may know, and part of the whole revitalization and refurbishing, modernizing of Pennsylvania Avenue. Right out there in front of the old Willard Hotel was written the Battle Hymn of the Republic.
Some of the bands in this parade are just playing the Battle Hymn of the Republic over and over and over again as they march down the street. So that old hymn is getting its due today.
And the Arizona contingent moves through.
I wondered what that flag was earlier. You know, there are flags along the back of the reviewing stands from the 50 states and from the territories, and I saw that flag earlier and couldn't place it as what state it was, just trying to recognize it. And the only one I could think of was a rising sun. It had to be Arizona. I should have bet on it. I was right.
The masked state flags, which those Culver riders carried, is one of the prettiest sights in America, I think. They're such colorful flags, and we don't often see them all in one place. It was a lovely sight.
Charles, we were talking some during the day about how these inaugural parades have grown. Each time around, they seem to get a little bit, we get a little bit better, they get more expansive and a little bit more expensive.
Just look at that reviewing stand, will you? Back in, I guess it was 1853 for Franklin Pierce, they spent $322 to build a reviewing stand for the president to sit in, and they added in the cost of 16 extra policemen for the day, and that was it. Shows how we've changed as a country.
You know, Charles, there were some people in Washington, and many of them supporters of George Bush, who were saying before this all started, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could take the money and help the homeless, give it to the poor? Those kind of arguments, nothing new in the American dialogue, and continue to this day. One never quite knows, I think, if you're the incoming president, what to say or do about that.
Well, money that people are perfectly willing to give to make a political point, and 20 million such dollars were given to help finance this event, at least 20.
Taking its marching place now in front of the reviewing stand.
Boy, if there's a finer looking band than that in the world, I'd like to see it.
Sorry, thank you for that. Simplified, huh? Herbert Collins, our historian and helper here today, says that John Philip Sousa himself marched in an inaugural parade once to his own great marching music. Right, Professor Collins?
That's correct. He was professor at the time, and he was leading a troop of Marines in the band.
Oh, let's listen to this.
That goes back to 1881.
You just saw there, Dan, the Commandant of the United States Marine Corps, who moved into place next to President Bush to take the salute of the men he commands. I think each member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the others, moved down as their respective service bands marched by in front of the presidential reviewing stand.
And now the California contingents start to roll in. Charles Peralta, we heard Peggy say, we went to the break a while ago, remind us again about the hostages, the U.S. hostages still in the Middle East. And we have the chore here today, the job of mixing the joy of a new administration and the jubilation, the celebration, which is what we're basically covering this parade, with the reminders of such things as the hostages. And President Bush took note of it in his address, and I thought he was sending the Ayatollah message there, the old version of the ancient cry, "Let our people go," when he talked about Americans being held against their will in foreign lands and those who want good relations with the United States to show some faith, that sort of thing. And as the Marine man marched by, you thought of all those young Marines in Beirut.
Yeah, I did too. As a matter of fact, 8 years ago, they were just being freed, and they were much on our minds. I remember 8 years ago today, the strained face of President Carter.
Give me the Yale University.
Who had been living through all that for so many weeks and months.
Well, that was, of course, when President Reagan and Vice President Bush first came in, the release of the hostages. I was thinking about the Marines blown up in Beirut, those young Marines, 240. Our youngest and best killed there.
If you thought California went by pretty fast, it did. There was just one unit from California in this parade, the Sacramento County Sheriff's Mounted Posse, a few men on horseback, and that was it. So
I think as they go along, Charles, they get smaller. Texas had the biggest contingent, then Indiana, and I think you're going to see more and more of those states with just one unit. This is the Yale University concert band, by the way. Of course, you know that George Bush graduated from Yale, and some of the music that they're playing was written by another famous Yale graduate, Cole Porter. And I bet if you could name a lot of songs that Cole Porter wrote, you probably wouldn't think of Bulldog, Bulldog, and Bulla Bulla, but he's also responsible for those as well.
Well, good point, Ed. And our friend, President Benno Schmidt of Yale, will be so pleased that you pointed out that was the Yale University band playing Here's to Good Old Yale, Bulldog, Bulldog, Bulla Bulla, and Good Night for Harvard.
These riders represent another home state of our new president, Connecticut.
First Company Governor's Horse Guard, followed by the First Company Governor's Foot Guard. And that'll be followed by Delaware and the Alexis Pont High School Tiger Marching Band. Herbert Collins, what have been some of the more memorable inaugural parades from the standpoint of history? We said they've grown over the years. They've got more elaborate and expensive.
Well, we started out with them, of course, in Madison's time, as mentioned before. Jackson vetoed the parade. Really, the units in the parade, I think the 1841 parade was significant because you had log cabins pulled through the streets for that parade, and you had Tippecanoe clubs marching in that parade. The longest parade we've ever had was 1889, and it was after dark before the parade. Some of it never, it dispersed before it ever passed the reviewing stand.
Is that right?
Well, you know, Charles, a thought occurs to me. It's coming up near 4:30 Eastern Time, and this parade is just really beginning to roll. If they don't hurry, this parade could go on until after dark.
Sure.
Pretty easily.
Sure. I don't think there's a chance in the world that all these units can get past the reviewing stand before dusk, at least.
Well, Teddy Roosevelt's ended at 6:15, I believe, so maybe this will be somewhat like that one.
Well, we'd like to have them not go for the record.
You know, I think they're going to move along at their prescribed pace. You know, they had that, the military has a prescribed marching pace of 30-inch step, I'm told, at 120 steps a minute. And they've sort of adjusted it for the civilian population in this parade. So they're going to stay at that marching pace and move right along as they, however long it takes. And it's going to be dark when it's over, I think.
The sights and sounds live from the inaugural parade in Washington, D.C. And as the march continues, well, we were going to take a break for a commercial, but we've made a decision to stick with this for a while, and with good reason. Among other things, the Eastern High School Marching Band got to be one of the best marching bands in the country. It's coming up soon, if indeed we don't have it in front of us now. That Eastern High School Band, this is not it, the Eastern High School Marching Band from District of Columbia. under our candor when convenient rule here, we've lost our place in our book. I think this is the Alexis DuPont High School Tiger Marching Band from Greenville, Delaware. The Eastern High School Marching Band from the District of Columbia will be along shortly. The Tyler Quarter Horses from Delaware.
I think I saw the District of Columbia seal back there, so
yeah, they're just going by right in front of the president now as the seal of the District of Columbia. So you'd have the Eastern High School Marching Band from right here in Washington, D.C., just passing in front of the presidential reviewing stand now.
They didn't get a very long trip. All these high school, college kids look forward to the trip to Washington. Poor old Eastern got shortchanged.
They take the metro down here.
America, America, God shed his grace on thee.
This is a band that has a little fancier step than some of the bands we see. Of course, this is a tradition that was started by some of the great black college bands like Grambling University in Florida and A&M University that put on a show that's as good as a football game. You see a lot of the Big Ten university bands started to copy some of the steps from some of the black universities now.
Led, I noticed right behind Barbara Bush is one of those fellows who's wearing a humongous Texas hat. We hope he doesn't fit that old definition of all hat and no cattle, but no way of finding out immediately.
I think that's one of the Bush sons.
Well, certainly wouldn't apply to him. Well, speaking of being in step, we finally have ourselves in step here, and so now's the time to say, as another of the floats goes by, a group of folk traveled the longest distance of any in the parade to be here today. Ed, as best I can make out.
They sure didn't take the metro, I can tell you that.
Well, the inaugural parade running well behind schedule, and indeed, I'm prepared to say, Charles, that if they go all the way through the parade, and I think you can bet the best property you've got, if you're a wagering man, that George Bush is going to stay there to the last. One of these bands and floats goes by, then it'll be after dark here. Now, we always like to build suspense when we can. Yes, it's one of the anchorman's job when he can to build some drama into something. And now here it is, folks. A surprise for President Bush, who supposedly doesn't know the float has been included. A replica of the plane that President Bush flew in World War II, a TBM Avenger, is the plane Bush flew. And on this float is a Grumman Avenger, similar but not the same as the one President Bush flew. And what's going to happen is this float is supposed to surprise him. The State Seal of Idaho has rolled by, and the Parkway Central High School Marching Band, and the Land Farm Horses will be following up here in a moment. Now, here is the drama. What little we have left. On the float are 12 of George Bush's Navy buddies and the owner of this replica of the Grumman Avenger. We mentioned this once before today. There's a difficulty getting this replica of this World War II plane along this twisting, turning parade route, because there's only 2-foot clearance in some points at each point. That's one of the things that's going to hold up the back part of the parade. Now, we hope to be on the air. CBS News, like the Marine Corps, likes to be first in and last to leave when we can. We hope to be on the air when that replica of the plane comes through. Note that we can't give you a guarantee of that because it is they're having such a difficult time getting along the parade route. So that'll be something to look for as time goes along. But shh, don't tell President Bush, because he's supposed to know.
If the Vice President doesn't know it, he's the only one down here who doesn't know about it. General Yeager told me about it up here.
Well, and Ed, keep in mind how President Bush now, how much he detests leaks. I mean, he'd rather be dragged behind a horse than have something leak out.
I wouldn't be at all surprised to see him come out and try to come out of there. You know, they've got that bulletproof glass around there. I guess it would be kind of difficult to get around that. You know, the first time they actually had that bulletproof glass was for one of FDR's inaugurals, and he saw it in there and had them take it out.
Different time. Well, the Illinois parade units are beginning to come into view. That'll include the Christian Life High School Band from Rockford, Illinois. As President and Mrs. Bush Vice President and Mrs. Quayle enjoy the parade. We've spoken several times today about one of the more memorable inaugural parties. And man, you talk about party, that was that Andrew Jackson inauguration, which folks got into the White House and tore it up. And Andrew Jackson got so worried about things and disgusted that he went off to the local tavern to drink a little bit. We've talked about that several times. Now it comes that the Bushes do plan to continue the tradition, somewhat tradition, of openness at the White House during inaugurations, which in modern times have been much more genteel and well-behaved. And Leslie Stahl has the details at the White House. Leslie?
George Bush, the President of the United States, will open doors to the White House. On the other, anybody, he says he wants to be president of all, anybody can come to the White House. That's actually, and he will give them a short tour through the White House. I don't think that we've seen this, Dan, in 80 years since William Howard Taft last did this, although I think presidents before may have done it. This will certainly be a contrast with President Reagan. I can't remember this ever happening in the past 8 years, past 12 years. It's quite unique. I don't know if you can see behind me, Dan, an honor guard has just lined up here, representatives from each of the services, and when the parade is over, the Bushes and the Quayles are going to walk along here and then into the White House. One other contrast with Reagan, George Bush says he's going to work tomorrow after he gives a tour of the White House. He's going into the Oval Office. He's going to go to work on a Saturday. They say it's going to be a routine work day around here. Sunday will be a quiet family day, church and family, and then Monday it'll really be to work with a cabinet meeting, and we're off to the Bush presidency.
What we're seeing, Leslie, I'm aware you may not be near a monitor, the Boston police contingent, which the Boston Police Union supported George Bush, as it generally supports Republican presidential nominees. A reminder that the Bush campaign was shaped and remade the image of the candidate, really, around a kind of morality play, which was centered on the death penalty, prison furloughs, Pledge of Allegiance, and the police. Ed Bradley, here we have contrast. At noon, President Bush was saying to Congress, I reach out my hand to you in the inauguration parade. A reminder, the Democrats, rightly or wrongly, might read it as a little sticking it to them a bit, that he made this I'm for the police theme really play for him in the campaign and drove the Democrats to cover it.
Yeah, but you know, I think what he said, I thought he was very conciliatory to the American public and to the Democrats in his speech. It's sort of the undercurrent of what I heard was sort of, watch what I do. So don't look at what I've done. This is what I had to do to get here. And you look at these police units going by. I mean, they were really important to him in the campaign. The Boston police endorsed him. A really embarrassing Governor Dukakis in his own backyard. They came down, by the way, they swung down with a group from Springfield, Massachusetts, on a special train that was paid for by the inaugural committee and stopped in New York to pick up this contingent from the New York City Police Department. Here you get another big Democratic city that has support here for this president. And he's saying, as he said in that speech, at least I heard, watch what I do. I mean, he talks so much that what we have, our material possessions, are not as important. Leaving a big car, leaving a bigger house, and leaving a lot of money for your children. But he talked about some spiritual values, which he says are very important to him. If they are, and that translates into policy, I think that's what he's saying. Watch what I do with those values.
No question about it. And we heard Senator Mitchell say earlier on, when we asked him about, well, the difficulty of, on the one hand, saying you want to lead a kinder, gentler nation and reaching out as President Bush did so well in his inaugural address today, saying, listen, the campaign's one thing. Now I'm president of all the people, all the parties, all Americans. Everybody feels that way. But at the same time, when Senator Mitchell and other Democrats say they're going to watch what he does, not what he said during the campaign, that will include how his operatives conduct themselves. And after all, most members of the House of Representatives are running all the time because they're up every 2 years. This is going to get to be a very interesting situation, I think you'd agree.
Sure, particularly with Lee Atwater over there at the head of the Republicans now. I mean, he's very much interested in the redistricting battle. I mean, he'd like to see a resurgence of the Republican Party and Republican office holders, and he sees a way of doing it is is through redistricting, which has pretty much been controlled by the Democrats.
You know, you mentioned Lee Atwater, and we've mentioned him a time or two during the day. Why wouldn't we? He was so important to changing George Bush's image and running the rough-and-tumble campaign. But with Atwater himself, let's be fair, that since the election, he's given some indication, and since he's gotten the appointment as being the new Republican national chairman, that he may, it isn't to say that he's going to run kind and gentle election campaigns, he's going to do it, but it may be that Atwater and even some of the others known informally as the enforcers of the Bush campaign will be taking their cues more from the president than was the case in the campaign, where he, the candidate, took a lot of his cues from them. Well, however all that turns out, as the parade rolls on this day of celebration for George Bush, Dan Quayle, and all of those who worked so hard to put them here on this day, we'll be right back. As we wait, rolls by the reviewing stand in our nation's capital, we have seen that replica of an airplane similar to the one that George Bush flew in World War II, and so far so good. It's made all there. Well, no, I don't think you can quite see it. Back along the corner there. Well, you'll be seeing it soon enough. It's just made one of its more difficult turns. You're saying, well, why are they making so much of this airplane? Well, one thing, it's going to be one of the highlights of the parade for George Bush. George Bush went into the United States Navy at age 19 and became, as you probably heard, the youngest, it is said, fighter pilot of the war. Some dispute that, but he certainly, there's no dispute about the fact that he was young and he was brave. Flew combat missions as a very young man in the war. And there's that Avenger. Now, see, the wings fold back on this thing. This was in World War II a carrier-based aircraft. It was a torpedo aircraft of the sort that really won the war in the Pacific. I read the history of, say, the Battle of Midway. You know, it was as much of an air battle as it was a sea battle. In fact, even more so. See how the wings, they fold back when the plane was on the carrier, and then they fold out when it's ready to take off. Now, this is a torpedo plane, similar to the one that President Bush flew in the war. You know, in 1961, there was a similar surprise for President Kennedy. A replica of his Navy boat, PT-109, was included in his parade. Now, President Bush has seen this replica of the plane similar to the one he flew as it comes into view of the reviewing stand.
You know, I'm not sure he's picked it out yet. Dan, he just stood up and put on his coat, and he was talking with an admiral over here. I don't think he's picked it up yet. Well, the van's just passing him. The plane's still, halfway down Pennsylvania Avenue.
I thought I saw him raise his eyebrows in surprise, but maybe you're right. Well, the surprise is yet to come then. Well, we can see it very, very well, and now they've taken the wings back again. Marvelous replica of it.
Yeah, it's about 30, 40 yards still down Pennsylvania Avenue.
Well, it's made all those twists and turns, going to make it fine. Now,
see, I think Bob Hope has just picked it up now and pointed out to Yeager.
12 of George Bush's old Navy buddies and the owner of this plane replica, Dale Stewart, is aboard that float. And it's anchors away as the replica of the Grumman Avenger, similar to the plane President Bush flew in World War II.
Now he sees it.
Rolls into
He just saw it, Dan. You could see him point. He just saw it. Big smile on his face.
You take a look at this aircraft, Ed, I know maybe really the torpedoes would carry right below, actually hung in the belly of this Grumman Avenger. Right, you really can't see the belly of it. The torpedoes were right in the belly of the plane. Had at least a three-man crew. You had a pilot, co-pilot, navigator, torpedo man, and in the back you'll see it soon had a gun turret. Part of what distinguished this particular aircraft was a gun turret that turns at the back of the cockpit there.
He picks up he sees two of his old buddies from the Navy up there, Jack Guy and Leo Nadeau, who was the gunner on his plane. They're up at the top of that.
Oh, he loves it. There, see the torpedo bays are open underneath the plane. He's pointing out some of the distinguished. In fact, see that gun turret, just got a glance at it there at the back of the cockpit.
Where was that he was shot down? You said Chichijima, was it?
Chichijima.
Right.
Not to be confused with Iwo Jima. It's in the same quadrant of the globe. Well, former Navy combat pilot George Bush getting a real kick out of this one, as President Kennedy did when they ran his PT-109 by him in 1961. So, for the 40th time, the presidency of the United States has passed one man to another. We now have our 41st president. But it is passed not by force of arms, but by the power of the United States Constitution. After 200 years, the system still works. George Bush now takes on the responsibilities of president of this country and leader of the free world. In his inaugural address, President Bush said he does not fear the future because, and I quote him now, "Our challenges are great, but our will is greater." Private citizen Ronald Reagan, former President Ronald Reagan, flying home to California, his 8 years in the White House, a mixture of success and failure, but he certainly leaving as one of the more popular presidents of the modern era. Ironically, President Reagan leaves office as he came in, with some Americans still held hostage in a foreign land. For Mr. Reagan, his place in history still to be determined. History, unlike journalism, takes time. For Mr. Bush, there is plenty of history yet to be made. When it is, CBS News, as always, will be trying to be there to bring it to you. For now, for Charles Kuralt and all of my CBS News colleagues, Dan Rather in Washington on this inauguration day, I'll see you again with complete coverage of today's inaugural events on tonight's CBS Evening News.
From Washington, this has been CBS News continuing coverage of the inauguration of George Bush.